I apologize, I'm just getting my font big enough so my old eyes can read my notes.
This is the most important thing. Right?
The court calls the case of People versus Linda Sturmer, 09-16654. Counsel, state your appearances for the record, please.
Morning, Your Honor. Jay Blair appearing for the people, as well as Ms. Susan Snyderbean.
Good morning, Your Honor. Wolf Mueller on behalf of Linda Sturmer.
Ronald Skip Kelly on behalf of Linda Sturmer, Your Honor.
Thank you, and the record should reflect that Ms. Sturmer is also present. We're here for a Daubert hearing. Are the parties prepared to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Mr.
Yes.
Miller, you can call the first witness.
Thank you. We're
Thank
going to
you.
call Scott Leroy. Stand. Thank you.
Sir, if you raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please have a seat, and when you're comfortable, I'll have you give us your full name and spell your last for the record, please. And you can move the microphone, too. Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Scott Leroy, S-C-O-T-T-L-E, capital R-O-Y.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller?
Good morning, Mr. Leroy.
Good morning.
How are you? Good. Good. You and I will match. All right. Sir, we're here to talk today about your qualifications and your methodology you used in the investigation of the fire on January 7 of 2007 involving Linda Sturmer. You understand that?
Yes.
What did you do to get ready for today? What did you review?
I reviewed the original case report. I've reviewed testimony of the case. I've reviewed sections of NFPA 921.
What else?
The case file.
That's it?
And everything in the case file.
Yeah. About how long did you spend reviewing to get ready for today?
It's hard to tell since this has been scheduled for months. I probably spent 8 hours.
In total?
I didn't keep a record.
Approximately.
Approximately.
Okay. I want to talk to you today about NFPA 1033 for a little bit, okay?
Okay.
You understand that NFPA 1033 is the standard. It's called standard for professional qualifications for fire investigators.
Yes.
And it sets forth the minimum job requirements to be considered a fire investigator in the state of Michigan and nationally, right?
Yes.
You believe you comply with the standards set forth in NFPA 1033?
I do.
Right. Back in 2007, when you investigated this fire, the 2003 edition was in play, right?
Yes.
It's not something that's updated every year.
Correct.
Every several years, right?
Yes.
And the last one that we have, the one that's in effect today, is NFPA 1033 from 2014.
Correct.
In fact, there's a new one coming out probably in a few weeks, right?
Correct.
All right. What I've got in front of you is a book, and I want to show you some exhibits just for the court's record. These are proposed exhibits for today's hearing, but I want to go through just a few of them so you understand what we're going to talk about today.
All right.
Exhibit F, as in Frank, is the 1033 standard that's in effect today. See that? Oops. It's Office Max. It's the best we could do. You good?
Yes.
Okay. That looks like NFPA 1033.
Yes.
All right. We have as Exhibit A a copy of your curriculum vitae, which was provided to us by the prosecutor's office. I'm not sure if that's up to date as of today, but it's a recent one. That look like your CV?
It is an older one because it still has me working for the Michigan State Police.
That's correct. You retired when? Last year?
September of 20.
September of 20, and you are now in the private sector?
That is correct.
Are you consulting as a fire investigator? Is that what your job is?
Yes.
All right, do you have your own company, or are you working for some company?
I'm working for a different company.
What company?
Name is Statewide Consulting and Investigations.
Based out of where?
Three Rivers. Three Rivers, Michigan. Yeah, the CV that you have here is current to July 1st of 2018.
We'll get a new one from the prosecutor. All right. Exhibit B is the report that you authored in this particular case. That look like your report?
It's the original report, but not the two supplementals.
When did you do 2 supplements?
That same year.
All right. The supplements were done after what? What in the case?
Transfer of property.
Tell me what that meant.
When I picked up the evidence from the lab and turned them over to the sheriff's department, that created a supplementary, turning over the evidence to the sheriff's department.
That would have been somewhere probably within a couple weeks of the fire.
I'm looking at my reports to refresh my memory. Supplement number 1 was on January 31st, 2007.
And that reflects what?
Turning over the property in the case to Detective Van Dam of the Van Buren County Sheriff's Department.
Would that be the physical property like the clothes?
Yes.
Anything else besides the clothes? I know there was a gas can. We've seen that. Exhibits
All physical evidence.
Good. And the second supplement?
Second supplement was the closing sup, April 25th of 2007. Basically closing out my report and turning it all over to the Van Buren County Sheriff's Department.
When did you come to your conclusion in the first report, which is Exhibit B, which would be page 7?
My conclusion, I came to my conclusion after the lab results. I came to my conclusion after the lab results.
What date would that have been?
The lab results were completed on January 12th, 2007.
So would it have been right after that? Just confirming, it confirmed a positive sample of gasoline on Todd Sturmer's clothes?
Yes, on several articles.
On several items, but that's when you arrived at your conclusion, right after that?
Yes.
All right, so can we comfortably say within a week of the fire, you'd gone to the scene on the 7th, you'd gone to the scene on the 8th, you got the test results on the 12th, and right after that, you came to your conclusion?
Correct.
Fair? Okay. Let's talk about 1033 for a little bit if we can. 1033, you understand, and that's exhibit, direct your attention to exhibit F that we talked about. Section 1.1 says, and I'll direct your attention to the screen, this standard identifies the minimum job performance requirements for fire investigators. See that?
Yes.
Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Yes.
You have to comply with these minimum requirements to be considered a competent, qualified fire investigator, correct? Yes?
Yes.
All right. Number 1.2, the purpose of this standard shall be to specify the minimum job performance requirements for serving as a fire investigator in both the private and public sectors. Again, you agree with that?
Yes.
All right. Now, the NFPA, that is a nonprofit organization. It's international now, right?
I'm not a member of NFPA, but I believe so.
You are not a member
No.
of NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association?
No,
You are a member of the IAAI?
yes,
And as a member of the IAAI and as a certified professional fire investigator, you are familiar with NFPA 921.
yes,
You're familiar, obviously, as you said, with NFPA 1033.
yes,
You believe you complied with the requirements of NFPA 921, right?
correct.
And that is the guide that sets forth basically how you do your job as a fire investigator to investigate a fire.
The NFPA 921 is not listed as a guide. It is listed as recommendations.
It's a guide.
It's not listed as a guide, but it's it's probably the most recognized authoritative document we have.
You have 921 with you?
I do.
I have 921. I'm just going to show you the cover, if I may approach you.
You may.
NFPA 921 Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigations, 2021 version. You have that?
Yes,
Does yours say on the cover what mine says on the cover?
it does.
It is a guide, right? By virtue of what it says on the cover.
But within the document, establishes guidelines and recommendations.
Guidelines and recommendations for the investigation of fire.
Yes,
You would agree with me that the NFPA is in existence to further the quality and competence of fire investigators to help fire investigations, correct?
the NFPA is in existence to do a lot more than just that.
But one of the things is to make sure fire investigators are competent
Yes,
to improve the quality of fire investigations,
correct.
whether it's with respect to future criminal cases or civil cases, right?
Yes,
All right. And you said it is the leading authority for training on fire investigations in this country, isn't it?
it is.
It is what you've been taught when you've attended seminars.
Correct.
Going back to your first seminar, correct?
Correct.
Which would be the 2-week course of arson investigation for the Michigan State Police.
Yes.
When you did that and started your first course, just by way of background, what year was that?
I want to refer to my CV for those dates. The 2-week base, which was then referred to as Basic Fire Investigation School, was in April of 1998.
So you first started fire investigation in 1998.
That's when I first started taking training.
When did you first become certified either by the state? We'll start with the state, as a state police officer.
So what was that?
When did you first become certified by the state as a fire investigator?
As a fire investigator, as a police officer.
Fire investigator.
I was hired when I was hired into, or shortly after I was hired into the Fire Marshal Division in 2001.
You were a police officer all the way through your career as a Michigan State, even as a fire investigator, right? You never
Correct.
lost your police officer status.
Correct.
M. Coles, right?
Correct.
Right. So, by the time of this fire, did you say 2001? You were
2001.
2001, so about 6 years in, correct?
Yes.
All right. Back in 2007, the 2003 version of 1033 was in existence, and you didn't have to,
Oh, 1033, yes.
with me?
Yes.
And you didn't have any specific qualifications that you had to meet like you have to meet now, the 16 categories, correct?
I don't believe so.
All right. If I may, Your Honor?
You may.
Thanks. This is just 1033, the 2003 version, just to refresh your memory if it has anything of the qualifications in section 1.
The qualifications are just very basic.
Right.
Minimum age and things like that.
Not like we have now, the specific qualifications, right?
Correct.
The specific qualifications you have to have now under 1033
It
listed in Exhibit F. And I'm going to call your attention to section 1.3.7. 16 different categories, and it says the investigator shall have and maintain at a minimum an up-to-date basic knowledge of the following topics beyond the high school level. You see that?
Yes.
Did I read that right?
Yes.
Category 1, fire science. 2, fire chemistry. 3, thermodynamics. I'll start with those 3. Do you believe you have a up-to-date knowledge of the following topics, fire science, beyond high school?
Yes.
You believe you have an up-to-date knowledge beyond high school in fire chemistry,
Yes.
in thermodynamics,
Yes.
in thermometry?
Yes.
You know what thermometry is?
Yes.
What is it?
It is the science and study of taking temperature, measuring temperature.
Measuring temperature. Things like thermometers, right?
Yes.
Thermocouples,
Yes.
right? Have you used thermocouples in the course of your 20-plus year career?
Yes.
All right. You know what a thermocouple is?
Yes.
It's a device that measures temperature, right?
Correct.
You've probably seen it in training exercises.
Correct.
Right. All right. Fire dynamics, you believe you have a up-to-date basic knowledge in fire dynamics. Is that true?
Yes.
How about number 6, explosion dynamics?
Yes.
Let's see if we can get this back up. And number 7, you can read that.
Computer
Exhibit
fire
F.
modeling?
Yep. Do you believe you have an up-to-date knowledge of
Yes.
that?
Which exhibit is that in
That's,
your book?
oh, Exhibit F?
Okay.
And how about 8, fire investigation, obviously? right?
Yes.
Number 9, fire analysis.
Yes.
10, fire investigation methodology,
Yes.
which is basically the methods, scientific method of getting to cause and origin.
Correct.
Right? Fire investigation technology.
Yes.
How about hazardous materials?
Yes.
How about failure analysis and analytical tools? You have an up-to-date knowledge beyond high school?
Yes.
How about fire protection systems?
Yes.
How about evidence documentation, collection, and preservation? I don't know if they just talk about that in high school, but you certainly have an up-to-date knowledge on that.
I do.
And it's part of your being an MSP officer and a fire investigator, you have to take detailed notes and reports, right?
I take notes and reports.
Well, it's part of the process, having detailed, accurate reports with an
Correct.
MSP. And finally, electricity and electrical systems. You believe you have an up-to-date, beyond high school knowledge of electrical systems.
Yes.
All right. Let me see if I can make sure we get this. And we're back. Thank you. Now let's talk about the first one, fire science. Tell me what fire science is.
Fire science is the general body of knowledge as it pertains to fire and the related subjects and their interactions with people or places and things.
Keep going. Fire science?
Fire science,
Okay. You have to have some knowledge of thermodynamics, right?
correct?
Some knowledge of physics, right?
Correct?
Kinetics.
Uh,
Well, if we look at what fire science is, do a little better job. It is the body of knowledge concerning the study of fire and related subjects. Talks about combustion, flame, products of combustion, heat release, heat transfer, fire and explosion chemistry, fire and explosion dynamics, thermodynamics, kinetics, fluid mechanics, and fire safety. So tell me, what is kinetics?
I cannot give you a definition of kinetics.
Do you know it's a branch of physics?
Excuse me?
Do you know it is a branch of physics?
Yes, I believe it's has to do with physics of motion.
Having to do with motion, right?
Yes.
And if we blow this up a little bit, it is a branch of chemistry or biochemistry concerned with measuring the rates of reactions. It has to do with heat transfer, doesn't it? Rates of reactions,
Yes.
right? The rates of chemical and biochemical reactions, and physics, the study of forces acting on mechanisms, right?
It sounds pretty much like biochemistry.
All right. So you believe, as a man of science, you've taken a lot of,
I never said I was a man of science.
as a person who's taken a lot of seminars and courses over the years, right?
Yes.
In fire investigation, you've covered things like forces acting on mechanisms, right?
Yes.
And you know you have to have a higher than high school education in those, correct?
When it forces as it pertains to fires.
Right, right. Do you know what the fundamental laws of physics are?
The fundamentals of physics? No.
Do you know what Newton's laws of motion are?
Some of them
Have you heard of them?
I have.
All right. What is Newton's first law of motion?
First law of motion, I believe that's what is in motion tends to stay in motion
And,
until reacted with another force.
and,
I don't know.
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point in time. I'm not sure that the proffered testimony of a fire investigator has anything to do with the laws of physics. I don't believe Scott Leroy or Sergeant Leroy is qualified in physics or is an expert in physics, nor are we offering him as an expert in physics. Physics is a very unique and specific field that, as the court is well aware, I'm sure, from her own education, that requires years of study and specific education, and most of physicists are doctors. So I guess I would object at this point.
Your Honor, Mr. Leroy says he has beyond the high school knowledge in the areas of kinetics, which involve physics, and he just admitted that. The fundamental laws of motion, Newton's laws of motion, are high school physics. I just want to know if he understands that.
There's no evidence that that's high school physics.
Your Honor, we can go to Exhibit U.
I'll allow some degree of questioning on
Thank
these
you.
points for his qualifications as an expert.
Thank you.
At some point, we may be getting too far afield, however.
You talked about a body in motion stays in motion unless acted on by an outside force,
Yes.
right? What's the rest of it?
I do not know.
A body at rest tends to remain at rest unless acted on by an outside force. You understand that?
Yes.
Right. That's Newton's first law. What's Newton's second law?
I do not know.
Would you bring it to mind if I told you it has to do with force and acceleration?
No.
No? Newton's second law. Force is equal to change in momentum for constant mass, change in mass times acceleration. You know that though, right?
No.
You didn't know that.
I've heard of it. I couldn't tell you the formula.
Wouldn't know how to apply it, would you?
No.
All right. What's Newton's third law?
I do not know.
What's Newton's fourth law?
I do not know.
I'm just messing with you. There is no fourth law of motion. What about thermodynamics? Do you have some idea of thermodynamics
Yes.
beyond a high school education?
Yes.
You know the fundamental laws of thermodynamics?
I'm familiar with them.
All right. What's the first law of fundamental law of thermodynamics?
I believe the first law is energy is not created or destroyed. It's only transferred.
Into form. Are you looking at something right now?
Yeah, I'm looking at the notes I took to prepare for court today.
All right. Can I see that?
You may.
Did you put that together?
I did.
All right. What's Newton's second law?
Newton's second law is
Wait, objection, are we talking
I'm
thermodynamics or
sorry.
Yeah, I
Newton's
think you
laws?
went backwards. Yep.
What's the second law of thermodynamics? Fundamental law.
Second law. It's not where heat transfers. That's the third law. I can't recall what the second law is.
The word entropy mean anything?
Entropy. The temperature wants to create an equal state. Entropy.
Would you agree with me that entropy is a measure of the state of disorder of a system?
No, I wouldn't disagree with you because I don't know what you're talking. Oh, disorder of a system, heat is generated to create physical energy or to make mechanical energy to use as force.
It's a measurement of the disorder of a system, isn't it?
Those are your words.
What's the third law of thermodynamics?
The
Your Honor, I guess I want to stop and object. I understand Mr. Miller just snatched the notes from Mr. Leroy. I mean, I understand if he doesn't want him to refer to them, fine, but he's walking around, I mean, those are his work product, his notes. I don't understand why he gets to hang on to these.
It's a cheat sheet that you made for today, right?
I wouldn't call it a cheat sheet. There's a lot of information here. Of course I prepared it.
I just want to know, do you
Do you
know
want us
without
to make a
looking?
copy of that so you
Can I
both
please?
have it? Do you want one?
Sure.
Okay, we'll take a pause and make copies.
2-minute break, that's fine, thank you.
You can make me one too, please.
We off the record, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thanks.
Mr. Blair, can you give me a little pause?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you just meant.
Your Honor, can we get a copy for me and one from Mr. Kelly?
Yeah.
Thank you.
2, 3. Okay, we're back on the record. Does everybody who wanted a copy have a copy?
I've got one, Kelly has one.
Okay.
Robert has one.
Thank you.
Thank you. You talked about the second law of, fundamental law of thermodynamics, you see that?
Yes.
The entropy of a system always increases. Entropy is the natural tendency toward disorder, right?
I'm not going to, since I don't know where you got that,
You can't agree or disagree. 'Cause
Correct.
You really don't know if I'm right or not, right?
correct.
Because you don't know. Fair?
Of that statement, no.
All right. What would be, let's go back to the first law that I think you had right, conservation of energy,
All right.
right? You know what the formula is for conservation of energy?
No.
Let me see if I can help you to see if it'll refresh your memory. You see that?
Yes?
Delta U equals E minus W. Does that refresh your memory?
No.
You know what U is?
No.
You don't know that that's internal energy of a system.
No.
You know what E is?
No.
That would be the energy of a system. You know what W is?
I'm assuming it probably means work.
Work. And
Your
what is
Honor,
the-
I'm going to object again. I think we're going way abounds of what this hearing is about today. We're delving into an area of super expertise in thermodynamics. I have friends that are mechanical engineers. I'm sure they could answer that question. They went to college for 5 or 6 years to become engineers. This is about whether or not he's qualified as an expert in fire investigation. The problem is, I understand where he's coming from. It's beyond high school. Well, what's beyond high school? I mean, it could be a year of a minor college course that covers just a little bit of a basics. That's the problem we're going into. We're going way out in left field into what is way beyond high school.
Your Honor, I'm going to tie this up real quick.
Okay.
Once we
So-
get past the next law of,
Okay.
the laws of thermodynamics, I'll be able to address that. But it goes, just to address the objection right now.
I'm going to allow some questioning on these topics. I recognize that in the end I have to make a ruling on this, and at what point are we being requiring hyper qualifications versus the bare qualifications to testify as an expert witness on the subject when I'm looking at this 1.3.7. So I am allowing some degree if
Thank
you're
you.
going to move on.
You know what the third law of thermodynamics is?
The third law is absolute zero is unattainable.
Very good, you have some familiarity. The entropy of a system approaches a constant value as the temperature approaches absolute zero, right?
Correct.
And what's the fourth law?
There's no fourth law. It's called the zeroth law.
Good, what's the zeroth law?
I believe that's no. Can't recall it this time.
Zeroth law. If one system is in thermal equilibrium with a third system, and a second system is in thermal equilibrium with a second system, the first and the second, or a third system, first and second systems are in thermal equilibrium too, right?
Correct.
Oh, you do know that now.
I've heard it, yes.
Okay. Going back to that first law of thermodynamics, internal energy, energy minus work, remember that we talked about? Delta U equals E minus W, remember that?
But you wrote on the board?
Right. You don't have any idea of that equation, do you?
I do not.
And you don't have any idea then how to apply it, correct?
Not that equation.
All right. If we go to Exhibit U, you with me?
Yes.
Exhibit U, what's that say at the first page?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. It looks like we have a photocopy of a textbook on physics from, I have no idea what this is from, where it is, what it is.
It's from Northville High School, Your Honor. It's a high school physics book, and if I need to lay the foundation after this witness, my son is in the audience. It's his physics book from 12th grade. It's a high school physics book, and the court can take notice of it. On the second page, I think it even says Northville High School.
Again, I guess I'm going to jump just to relevance at this point.
Well, the expert has to have high school qualifications in the subjects according to the list I saw.
I understand.
And this is covering one of those, and it appears to be a high school textbook. So
Thank you.
he's making his argument in that regard as to his qualifications. So I'll
And
allow it.
it's for impeachment. Sir, you remember you said you had a beyond high school knowledge in the area of physics?
Yes.
Right. Would you agree with me that on page 130 it talks about Newton's first law?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that on page 136, it talks about Newton's second law?
Yes.
You didn't know those when we talked about it, did you? 5 minutes ago.
No.
All right. So would you agree with me, at least as in terms of the fundamental laws of physics, you don't have even a high school knowledge of it, do you?
I'm aware of those laws. I couldn't regurgitate them as first and second laws,
And you
as
wouldn't-
is in a test.
And you wouldn't know how to apply them in the field, would you?
Depends on how to apply them.
How do
Depends on the application.
You wouldn't know how to use those in terms of your day-to-day to calculate things like work and force,
No.
right?
Your Honor, I
Not
guess
to use
I'm
the
going to
formula.
object. I'm looking at 1033. I don't see physics in that definition anywhere. Where does it say physics?
Your Honor, he's already admitted thermodynamics is a branch of physics. Kinetics involves physics and the laws of motion, and you saw when I brought up the definition of physics, he agreed.
But
That's what that is, and he also has beyond a high school knowledge in the fundamental laws of physics.
fire science, and if you look at the definition, Judge, it is such as.
What,
I'm sorry, it's an Exhibit F, Judge.
okay. What about the notion of it being a part of the kinetics?
I understand that, but what I'm telling the court is the definition of fire science where kinetics even comes up. It's such as, it's not as, it is a requirement that he knows this.
Such as, which would include, and he's admitted that he has, or claimed that he has more than a high school level in fundamental physics.
I'll overrule the objection, allow it.
Thank you. Now, if you look at page 409 of that same high school physics book, you're going to see it talks about the first law of thermodynamics, doesn't it?
Yes.
And when it talks about the first law of thermodynamics, it goes on, and then on page 400, all the way through 420, it talks about the second law, right?
What page are you on?
That would be 409 through 420, just talks about the laws of thermodynamics.
Your Honor, I do have one question, I guess, about this exhibit. Maybe Mr. Miller will have to lay a foundation for this. Was his son in regular high school physics or advanced placement high school physics? Because advanced placement courses in high school are courses that are actually of a college level, not of a high school level. So just because it happened in high school doesn't make it high school physics. If it's AP physics, it's college level physics.
We can clear that up, Your Honor. It's physics, a regular high school physics course.
I mean, I just want to make sure we're all clear here.
Okay. So counsel, I'm going to tend to allow in, unless we're getting repetitive or completely off base, I'm going to tend to allow both sides some latitude to introduce evidence. But
Thank you.
then I can sort through in making my ruling of whether or not this goes to admissibility or weight or nothing at all. I'll take all that into account in making my ruling.
Thank
And
you.
certainly
Good.
I'll allow both counsel to prepare arguments after this hearing by briefing.
Right.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So,
I mean, your job is the gatekeeper, so you need to know this and be able to compare what his claimed knowledge is to what his actual knowledge is.
thank you.
So if we also look at exhibit the 921, you're familiar with this section, aren't you? And we're going to talk about cause in great detail. Oops, let me get rid of that. A cause hypothesis is disproved if it violates the fundamental laws of physics or thermodynamics. Water does not burn. A hypothesis positing the ignition of water would be wrong. See that?
Yes.
Did I read that right?
Yes.
So in order to determine whether or not a cause hypothesis is disproved based on violation of the fundamental rules of thermodynamics and physics, you actually have to know what the fundamental rules and laws of physics and thermodynamics are, wouldn't you?
To be disproved?
To know whether it's disproved by the fundamental laws, you actually have to know the fundamental laws.
But I don't know what you do. But
Right.
the formula doesn't necessarily need to know that in the fire scene. But yes.
And we just talked about your knowledge base of the fundamental laws of physics and your knowledge base of the fundamental laws of thermodynamics, didn't we?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about heat transfer. Heat transfer, sir, is, well, you tell me what it is.
Heat transfer, when heat transfers from a hotter source to a colder source.
Can you use heat transfer without using the word in the definition?
Talk about heat transfer without talking about heat? Is that what you're asking?
Oh, you said heat transfer is heat transfer. What is heat transfer?
The movement of heat from a hot area to a colder area.
And what kind of heat transfer are there?
What kind there are?
What types of heat transfer are there, sir?
There's conduction.
Which is what?
Conduction is when heat is transferred through a medium, like a pipe or some object in between the two areas. There's convection that is transferred due to buoyancy of heat and the heat rising. There is radiation, where the light energy coming off of the first heat source transfers the heat to the second heat source, to the second area. And there's direct flame impingement.
Heat transfer, what's the symbol of heat transfer?
I do not know.
In all the courses that you've taken and all the training you've taken, you don't know what the symbol for heat transfer is?
I'm sure I've seen it at some lectures, but I cannot regurgitate it at this point.
Is the term Q dot, does that ring a bell to you?
I've seen Q dot.
All right. What are the units of heat transfer?
Heat transfer is either the heat release rate or joules. No, not heat release. It's joules, I
You think
believe.
it's joules? Actually, heat transfer is a measure of power, isn't it? Q dot,
Yes,
which would be what? What's the unit of that?
watts.
Watts. And what are watts?
Guess I don't know the definition of watts.
Watt is a joule per second. Energy per unit time. You understand that? Yes?
Yes.
And a joule is what?
A joule is a form of recording of energy, I
It's
believe.
a unit of energy. And what does that represent?
A unit of energy?
Yes. What? The unit joule, what does that represent?
I do not know.
Watt equals joule per second, we talked about, right? Yes?
That's what you talked about.
You told me you agreed with that, joule per second?
I told you I didn't know.
You don't know. Joule, don't know, correct?
Correct.
So we'll take watt, you don't know. Joule, you don't know. If I told you joule is a unit of energy or work and represents force times distance, you know what the unit is for force?
No.
Newton ring a bell to you? A Newton.
The
You
Newtons?
know what a Newton is.
I've heard of the Newtons.
You don't know what it is.
I could not give you the formula for it.
Newton. Don't know. You know what a Newton represents?
No.
Now, you say you're able to apply these concepts of heat transfer, conductive heat transfer, right, in the real world?
Yes.
Do you know if there are equations that are important in the real world?
There are equations. I haven't came across one that translates to a real world.
Well, NFPA describes situations, don't they?
They do.
And there are other NFPA, you said it is the preeminent authority, correct?
I don't know.
That's what everybody learns to, certifies to, correct?
Yes.
But there are other sources, aren't there? It's not the only one.
Correct.
What are some of the other sources that people go to that are references or authorities?
There's a book by Fire Principles by Kennedy, I believe, is one of them.
Kennedy's book?
There is a book put out by IFSTA, Principles of Fire.
Have you learned from and read anything from Kirk's? Kirk's ring a bell?
Kirk's.
Kirk's Fire Investigation is something
Yes.
that's considered an authority or a reference manual for people to look at, right?
Yes,
The user's manual for NFPA 921, you ever seen this before?
I've seen it.
Do you own it?
No.
All right. It helps explain some of the more technical stuff in 921, right?
I do not own it.
You don't know?
I don't own it, so I've not seen it.
You've never read it?
Correct.
All right. Let's see. We talked about Kirk's Fire Investigation, right?
Yes.
And just so you know, Kirk's Fire Investigation is Exhibit S. S is in Sam, if you want to know. The user's manual, 2 different chapters are Q and R in your exhibit book. Okay, we'll talk about that. Kirk's is a reference manual and authority, right?
Yes.
Forensic fire scene reconstruction by Iakov and DeHaan. You know those guys, right?
I know of Mr. DeHaan, Dr. DeHaan.
And that's a reference book and an authority in the field of fire
It's a reference
investigation
book.
that people look at and use to.
I can't talk to what other people look at.
Okay, because you don't own it,
I do not.
and you've never looked at it.
No.
You recognize that other people do. And have.
Possibly.
And you recognize that it's been brought up at seminars. These are things that you can look at for reference, correct?
Correct.
John Lentini, you ever heard of him?
Yes.
Scientific Protocols for Fire Investigation. That's another reference manual that people use and talk about, right?
I've heard of John Latini, and I've heard.
Okay. He's an authority in fire investigation. He's probably lectured at maybe some of the things that you've been to, right?
Possible.
Have you been to NFPA conferences?
No.
Right. But again, you've heard other people say, yeah, Lentini's an authority and he has a book and you might want to read that for reference, right?
I've never heard anybody say that.
Now, getting back to real life applications. If we had a fire terrible, but that's orange, so that's a fire. And we had conductive heat, and we had,
Can you see that, Mr. Blair?
I can, I'm standing. I can
Feel
see it.
free to move about.
let me know if I need
Yeah.
to move.
You're fine.
So we had, on this wall, heat, okay? You with me?
Yes.
T1, T2 would be where the heat is transferring from hot to cold, right?
Depending on the surface.
Right.
Yes.
Does it ever go from cold to hot?
No.
Right. So heat transfers this way from hot to cold, correct?
Correct.
We have this fire we have here. You know what the formula for heat transfer is. If you wanted to just do an everyday application to be able to see how the heat transfers from one surface to another.
I do not know the formula.
Let me see if I can give you some help. You ever seen that formula? Q dot equals Ka times delta T over L.
No.
You wouldn't even know what A would be in this surface, would you?
No.
You wouldn't know what L would be in this surface, would you?
No.
You wouldn't know what K is, would you?
No.
Do you know, you don't know that it's conductivity? It has to do with that?
No.
You know what delta T means?
Delta means difference. T is
T2
temperature.
minus T1. So you wouldn't even be able, in the most basic sense, be able to calculate what the heat transfer was if you used your thermocouples and had T1 and T2, fair?
No.
That is fair, I'm correct?
Yes.
I assume then the same answer is for convective heat transfer. You know, you just told me what convective heat transfer is, right?
Yes.
Heat across fluids, right?
Yes. Or I said as buoyant air or buoyant heat rises.
Right. As opposed to going through a surface.
Correct.
So if we have heat transferring the air to this surface, and we wanted to know what the heat transfer was from the air to the surface here that we have T1, would you know how to get there?
No.
Let me see if I can help you out. Q equals HA times delta T. Does that ring a bell?
No.
Wouldn't know how to use it, right?
No.
Wouldn't know what H is, right?
Correct.
You wouldn't know that it's the convective heat transfer coefficient?
No.
Wouldn't know what units it is?
No.
Wouldn't know what units of A is, would you?
No.
Wouldn't know what units delta T is, would you?
Correct.
So in this sense, you wouldn't even be able to apply some basic understanding to how to determine heat transfer, fair?
Basic of heat transfer,
You
I wouldn't be able to do the
calculate.
formula. Correct.
Now, it's not just me making up formulas. There are certain basic understandings of how to apply this stuff that's in the authorities that you cited, correct?
I'm sorry? What was that?
There are certain examples and things that you have to have a basic understanding how to apply in the authorities you cited to me, correct?
Yes. I believe so.
Okay. Because just knowing a definition doesn't mean you know how to apply the concept in the field, which is what you need to do, correct?
In the field, yes.
Anybody can memorize the definition. My kid's pretty smart. He can memorize definitions, right? But doesn't mean he knows how to apply it. Fair?
Yes.
And just because you know a definition of what conductive heat transfer is and convective heat transfer doesn't mean you know how to apply it in the field, correct?
do know how to apply it in the field.
Good. Because if we look at Kirk's fire investigation, which I told you is Exhibit S as in Sam, and we're going to go there. Just a fun. Let me get that. Let me get my book. Make sure I understand what that'll be page 136 in Exhibit 6. You with me, sir?
Yes.
That's not Wolf Mueller making up some kind of esoteric problem, is it? That's Kirk's putting an example of how you finding out if you know how to calculate heat transfer, correct?
That is the formula in Kirk's.
All right, it's what we call a story problem that we all loved in high school and junior high school. You remember that?
Yes.
Story problem. Did you like them?
Nobody does.
Some of us did. So if you were to try to solve this problem, which Kirk says you need to be able to do, it says a fire in a storage room in an automobile repair garage raises the temperature of the interior surface of the brick walls and ceiling over a period of time, 500 Celsius. See that?
Yes.
Have you investigated fires in places like garages and things?
Yes.
All right, so this is a real world application, isn't it?
Depends on where you're going with it.
The ambient air temperature on the outside of the brick wall of the garage, as you can see, is 20 degrees Celsius. You see that?
Yes.
You know what ambient air is?
Yes.
Just the outside temperature, right?
Yes.
Right. The thickness of the wall is 200 millimeters or 0.2 meters, correct? That's what it says in the problem, right?
Yes.
Thickness of the wall, 200 millimeters. The convective heat transfer coefficient, remember that we mentioned?
Yes.
That you didn't know?
Correct.
That's 12 watts per meter squared Kelvin. You know what a Kelvin degree is?
Yes.
What is it?
It is, Kelvin is the temperature that bases itself at zero as absolute zero, which is where no molecules move.
Okay.
And then goes on from there.
And how do you get from Celsius, which they're telling you, to Kelvin?
I don't know on the top of my head.
So in this particular example that they give us, what do they want you to do? You can read the problem. I'll help you. Calculate the temperature to which the exterior wall will be raised. See that?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a fire on the left side, right? All right.
Yes.
In the problem. That would be the one temperature, the hot side, and they call that what? 500 degrees Celsius? Right?
Yes.
Temperature hot equals 500. How many Kelvin is that, do you know?
It says here 773.
You don't know how they got there, though, do you?
I do not.
And they want you to find the temperature on the cold side, right? Which is the other side of the wall, right?
Correct?
So
Your Honor, I'm going to have to object. I guess I don't understand where this is headed. Are we doing math problems in court now? I don't.
Your Honor, this goes to his qualifications to understand fundamental thermodynamics, which he said he did. This is Kirk's, which he says is an authority. This is an example in Kirk's, so you have to know it to meet the qualifications of 1033. It's certainly relevant to demonstrate his level of competence.
We're here on a 702 issue where this court has to determine whether this witness is qualified as an expert by knowledge, skill, experience, training, or education. Among other things, I have to decide as a result of this hearing, so I will allow it for that purpose.
And you understand this goes to heat transfer, which is what we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Which was one of the specific 16 categories we had in 1033, right?
Yes.
Which you said you had more than a high school knowledge of, correct?
Correct.
And you also know that you need to be able to apply it in the real world, right?
Correct.
All right. So, how do we determine the cold temperature on the right side of that wall?
In the real world, I don't care what the temperature is. I just know that the heat transfers.
Well, we're going to find out what the heat transfer is through the temperature. Do you know what the heat transfer is through here, the number?
No.
All right. Well, let me help you. We'll start with the conductive heat transfer, Q dot COND equals, what did I tell you it was before? KA delta T over L, right? All right?
I don't know.
You don't know. Well, if it gives you, we'll say L is that 0.2, okay? And it gives you what K is, 0.69, right? In the problem? Right on the bottom of the wall, sir.
Yes.
Gives you K, gives you H, gives you L as 0.2, right? Uh, 0.2 meters, the thickness of the brick wall.
Okay.
Gives you the hot temperature, 500 C's, right?
Okay.
Which is 773 Kelvin,
Yes.
right? It gives you the ambient temperature, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So then that has to equal the Q dot of convection, which is H, A, remember I told you, delta T. Right?
I don't know the formula.
Okay. And if delta T on the hot side is T hot minus T C, which is what we want to find out, and delta T on the cold side is TC minus 20, or what did it say it was in Kelvin?
The 20C,
297?
293.
293, my fault. 293. Oh, do we use Kelvin or should we be using Celsius? Or do you know?
I do not know.
All right, we should be using Kelvin. So, how do we solve this equation? No?
No.
No, if we get rid of the A's, we're on the same side. You remember that from basic high school math? Your high school math?
Long time ago, not much.
So, if TH minus TC equals, remember if one thing's on the other, on the bottom of one, we switch to the other side, you go to the top, right? So it goes H, L, TC minus 273, remember that? 293. All right?
I do not know.
And K goes to the bottom. Trust me with a calculator?
I will.
All right. I'm half Japanese, I should be able to figure it out. If we measure H, what did they tell us H was? 12?
12.
12 times 0.2, right? Which is L. Yes? Sir?
L is
0.2 times 0.2 divided by 0.69 gives you 3.47. We just round up to 3.5. That makes sense?
I do not know the formula.
So we got TH, which we had was what?
Your Honor, I guess he said he doesn't know. He
No.
doesn't know. He doesn't know. We're belaboring a point upon
Right.
which he doesn't know.
I do get that he doesn't know these concepts, so if you could move on, please.
If you had some understanding of the basic laws of thermodynamics and how to apply it in the field, you might be able to figure that problem out, right?
That problem is beyond the basics that you need to know for real-life fire investigation.
Why would it be in Kirk's then, one of the authorities you cited?
Because Kirk likes putting it in there as his textbook, I guess. I can't speak for Kirk.
All right.
Or actually, Kirk doesn't exist. It was John DeHaan that wrote Kirk.
In thermodynamics, do you know anything about the ideal gas law?
I know of some gas laws as it relates to pressure.
Tell me what the ideal gas law is.
Gas laws is if you raise the pressure, you'll have an expansion or temperature raise in a sealed container. If you have pressure in a sealed container and you raise the temperature, the pressure rises.
Is there an inverse relationship between pressure and temperature?
I don't know.
Is there an inverse relationship between the volume that you just talked about in a container and the temperature?
I don't know.
The ideal gas law, you must have seen this somewhere. PV equals MRT,
I've not seen that formula or don't recall that formula.
or heard of it in a seminar.
No.
So you wouldn't have any idea what this relationship means in terms of pressure, volume, and temperature. Fair?
No.
Am I right?
You are right.
And in terms of how to apply that fundamental rule of thermodynamics, the ideal gas law in the real world, you would have no idea. idea, fair?
Of course I would.
You do know how to do that then?
Not the formula.
Well, how would you do it in terms of calculating how pressure and volume and temperature are related?
I wouldn't calculate it.
What would you do?
I understand that if a sealed container is heated up, the pressure inside increases, and it will increase until such time it equalizes, causing a rupture in that container.
And you would want to know something about what pressure it takes to cause a rupture in a certain container, wouldn't you?
That is really irrelevant in a real fire investigation,
To you, right?
to me.
All right. I take it you have no idea then what the units of pressure are?
I'm sure I'd recognize them. PSI, inches of water column,
And all these metrics that you've been generally using, joules, newtons, you don't know what that is?
I do not.
Okay, you know what the
I
unit
know
of
that,
volume
I know that
is?
they're units of measure.
You know what the unit of volume is?
Unit of volume, I cannot think of it right now.
And again, you don't know what the temperature is Fahrenheit, Celsius, or Kelvin, do you?
In reference to what?
In the ideal gas law.
In the formula? Correct, I do not.
When we talk about radiant heat transfer, you remember that?
Yes?
Care to take a stab at that formula, what the transfer is?
No.
No clue, right?
No clue.
In terms of heat transfer, though, obviously that's a big category, big area of expertise you need to have, right? In fire science,
You need to understand radiant heat transfer.
and conductive heat transfer, and convective heat transfer, right?
Correct.
And you need to know things about the heat release rate, HHR, right?
Yes.
What is the unit of a heat release rate?
I believe the heat release rate is joule. Or what, no, excuse me, watt.
Watt. Heat release rate, you've heard of the term flashover, right?
Yes.
What is flashover? You can tell the court.
Flashover is a condition in an enclosed area when the heat gets to a point in an enclosed area, such as a room, that all items in the room reach their ignition temperature.
I think you folks have a nice saying. It's called having a fire in a room that goes from a room on fire, right? You ever heard of that?
I've heard that statement. I've never used that.
You know that in the pre-flashover phase, it's plenty of air or oxygen, right?
Yes.
Right. And so it's dependent on the fuel load, right?
What's dependent on the fuel load?
The heat release rate,
Yes.
right? Which is a measure of the power of the fire, right?
Correct.
Higher the heat release rate, the more power there is to the fire, the more things are going to burn more quickly, correct?
Correct.
Right. So when we're talking about heat release rate and it relates to fuel loads, a fuel load is essentially, in just lay terms, anything that can burn, right?
Correct.
A piece of furniture is a fuel load.
Yes.
A carpet is a fuel load.
Yes.
Wood framing is a fuel load.
Yes.
You want to know during your investigation, you want to have a good idea of what the total fuel load was in the room to know the heat release rate, right?
The heat release rate, the number, isn't that helpful in investigating a real life fire.
Understood, but just as a concept, because it's fuel dependent and dependent on fuel loads, you want to know, have a general idea of how much fuel load was in there. Was it stuffed to the gills with cardboard boxes? Was it an empty room, right?
Correct.
Which is what you try to do in all these investigations, right?
Depends on the investigation.
Because you know that at least in a pre-flashover phase, the heat release rate, it has a relationship to the total fuel load in the room, right?
Correct.
Right? And the total fuel load has a bearing on the heat release rate that we talked about, correct?
Correct.
Let me just bring up a section for you here. If we can go, I'd direct your attention to 5.6.3.1
In,
in NFPA 921, which for your record book would be Exhibit L.
What was the section again?
That's Exhibit L, and it's 5.6.3.1. Remember you told me that the total fuel load has a direct bearing on the heat release rate in the room. Would you agree with me that everything I just told you about that you agreed with is completely wrong? The total fuel load, according to NFPA 921, the total fuel load in a room has no bearing on the rate of growth of a given fire and the heat release rate in the pre-flashover phase. Is that what it says?
that's what it says.
So would it be fair that you, as you sit here, wouldn't have an understanding of the fuel loads versus the total heat release rate in a room? At least according to your answer and what that says. Fair? Would that be fair, sir?
Yes.
But heat release rate, HHR, is a fundamental concept in terms of heat transfer, isn't it? As a measure of the power of the fire.
The heat release rate is the measure of power of the fire.
And is a critical component in your understanding of heat transfer and how fires progress, correct?
Not how they transfer, but how they progress.
How they progress. Well, fires progress by transferring heat and energy to other things which catch them on fire, correct?
Yes.
All right. Your Honor, it's 10:20 right now. I might be breaking for a new area. If you give me 2 minutes just to consult, and then maybe
Sure,
we can take a break.
we can take a morning break.
Let me just consult.
Oh,
Couple
sure.
more questions. Thanks. Your Honor, I'm good at this point. We'll take a break and go to another category.
Okay.
Maybe we'll take a quick break.
So we'll break until 10:40.
Thank you.
Kelly Page, how are you? Your name was highly recommended to Mr. Stewart and I have a practice across.
That would be your student. That would be the full one.
A lot of the golden girlfriends call me many other things besides the gold. Yeah, I don't want to tell you what they are. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, my buddies are good buddies.
get with Gary, we'll see when we can put our schedules together and set it up. Good talking to you. Keep pushing.
Thanks. A couple minutes. But they can't, right now.
Questions attorneys like you, sure. Listen, attorneys, you think you're the best lawyer in the world. I say, strive to be the best. I do it all for you. I can't be the best. Keep up with it. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, keep up to date. You know, I can't answer these questions either, but I understand where they're coming from. I know how to answer them. But you gotta go fucking.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I think he wants to shit his pants and not come back.
Well, and now they're schooling them on all the qualification stuff. Instead of prepping them for, make sure you say this, like, did you look through the cheat sheet? I haven't even got here.
Oh, it's
Here's
right
this
here.
fucking cheat sheet, but I don't think it's,
I said, do you have a cheat sheet up there? If I'm gonna call it that. How do you not triple over this thing?
see if there's anything.
Where did that go? How do you know what you don't want to trip? Like I say, how do you not trip over this thing? What,
This I told myself,
Yeah.
turn left, turn left,
Yeah,
turn
there you go,
left.
because, I mean, the wire's on top too.
Right.
But, you know, like I say, in some respects, I knew I was gonna sort of feel sorry for this prick. He's a fucker. He put people in jail for no apparent reason because he thinks he knows something. Now, if he ever gets into, okay, here's your qualifier, you got 1,400 fires you're investigating, you've done 29 fatalities, but okay, from 2001 to 2001 to 2007, you know, what did you do before this fire? This is January. It's the first, that means he's only got 5 years, you know? I don't know when he said he was in 2001, but I didn't know what date it was, but ultimately, you know.
But a fatal on another fire, it doesn't matter, you know, that someone died. You know what I mean? You investigate the same way.
Well, to me, you should investigate all fires as though you're going to trial. So all fires are the same, but no, you better be a little bit more careful
Right.
when it comes to that kind of. this. Lucas. I can't remember this. It's outside. Yeah, he came up here and he's goofy because they did an arson and he had a handgun on him, and then he went back to Illinois, and then he got that crash. I remember. It's a goofy ass kid.
Yeah.
It's up on there. All the forms are in the ACT. It's just, it's literally just a headache of putting paper next to the right people and getting signatures and things that he notarized and stamped.
Back on the record in the case of People versus Linda Sturmer. You may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Let me just, before I go to the methodology, sir, let me just make sure I wrap up with something. These books that we talked about, there are reference manuals that people look at to keep up to date on in the field and in your trade. User's Manual 921, you see that?
Yes.
Remember we talked about that as a reference manual and people use that?
Yes.
You've never read it?
No.
You don't own it?
No.
Kirk's fire investigation. You've heard that in all your seminars, or a lot of them, right?
I'm aware of Kirk's fire investigation.
As a reputable authoritative source for information in fire investigation, right?
Yes.
You don't own it?
Yes, I do.
You do own this. Have you read it?
I've read sections.
Okay. You know, it's important to keep up to date, right?
Yes.
That's what 1033 said, right?
Yes.
Forensic fire scene reconstruction by ICOVE and DeHaan. See this?
Yes.
We talked about that being a reference manual, a reference book
Yes.
that people use to keep up to date on, right? What you need to do. Yes?
Yes.
You don't own it?
I do not.
You never read it.
No.
Am I right?
Yes.
And John Lentini, you said you've heard of Lentini, right?
Yes.
And he wrote a book, Scientific Protocols for Fire Investigation, right?
Because you're holding it? Yes.
Okay, you don't own it?
No.
Never read it.
No.
Let's talk now about what you did in this particular case. And before we do that, I want to make sure you and I are on the same page. I want to talk about the things that guide you in your investigation. Certainly one of the things are the principles and methods set forth in NFPA 921, right?
Yes.
921 is a consensus of people in the private sector, right?
Public and private.
Public, we'll get there. In the private sector, like you are right now.
Yes.
In the public sector, like you were when you were with the Michigan State Police.
Correct.
Right? Academics,
Correct.
right? And it's a consensus building organization, right? Which is how NFPA 921 comes about.
Yes.
All right. One of the things I assume guide you, correct me if I'm wrong, would be your ethics
Yes.
and your integrity.
Yes.
And in fact, you said you're a member of NFPA 9 or IAAI. You're not a member of 921
No.
or NFPA.
I am not.
You are a member of IAAI,
Yes.
and you know there's a code of ethics for fire investigators in IAAI.
Yes.
And you believe in that,
Yes.
and you adhere to that.
Yes.
One of them, and this is, Your Honor, Exhibit, I believe it's Exhibit G for the record. One of the important concepts,
I don't have anything in G. Do you have,
G is in George.
yeah, wait 1 minute. Oh, I have, in H, I've got the Department of Justice.
Nope.
No.
Exhibit G should be IAAI Code of Ethics.
Is yours empty, prosecutor?
That's your honor.
Ours is empty.
Oh, yours is empty? Thanks.
We'll make copies.
I'd fire somebody in my office, but I think it was me. Thanks. Sir, you see where it says in the last ethic sentence, I will bear in mind always that I am a truth seeker, not a case maker. That it is more important to protect the innocent than to convict the guilty. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
That's something you believe in, right?
Yes.
To your core, right?
I believe it to my
Yes.
core.
You are a truth seeker.
Yes.
You're not here to just try to get a conviction.
No.
Am I right?
You are.
Right. So because you're ethical and bound by this truth seeker ethics, you would be open to new information and new evidence that maybe you didn't consider, right?
I look at all evidence.
And you would be, as we sit here today, 14 years later, you would be open-minded to looking at new evidence that maybe you didn't consider, correct?
Yes.
And reevaluating position if it's necessary, correct?
If necessary.
All right. You're also, I want to see if you agree with a couple things. Exhibit H. Exhibit H is from the Department of Justice, Code of Professional Responsibility for the Practice of Forensic Science. You're in the business of forensic science, correct?
I've never been classified as a forensic scientist.
You're in the business of forensic fire investigation, right?
I'm a fire investigator.
Which
yes.
involves science principles that we've talked about.
Some, yes.
I just want to see if you agree with a couple of these principles. One is you are to conduct research and forensic casework using the scientific method or agency best practices. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Certainly the scientific method is the method you have to use in fire investigation, correct?
Yes.
And especially when you talk about what you're really trying to do is do an origin and cause investigation, right?
Yes.
Locate the origin of the fire And then from that, and following that, determine the causal factors, correct?
Yes.
All right. Then at the bottom, toward the bottom, I think I highlighted it, but if I didn't, I'll highlight it right now. Number 9, you see that?
Yes.
You're to make and retain contemporaneous, clear, complete, and accurate records of all examinations, tests, measurements, and conclusions in sufficient detail to allow meaningful review and assessment by an independent professional proficient in the discipline. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
You agree with that?
Yes.
And that's what you did in this case?
In the case, yes.
Maintain clear, complete, accurate records, all examinations, tests, measurements, and conclusions.
Yes.
You did that in this case?
Yes.
All right, in all aspects of the case?
Yes.
Because if you didn't, you wouldn't be adhering to one of these principles, and that's kind of embodied in the scientific method, isn't it?
What's,
Keeping good records, writing good reports, details.
it's not part of the scientific method, but it is part of.
It's part of what you need to do in order to allow people to review your work.
Yes.
That's an important part of your
Yes.
job responsibility, isn't it?
Yes.
Can we agree on a couple, what I think are fundamental principles? You tell me if you disagree. For a person in your business fire investigation, one would be to collect all the data that's relevant to whatever your issue is that you're looking at,
Yes.
right? Relevant data, data that is important to consider in order to do, as we talk about the scientific method, to develop a hypothesis,
Yes.
right? So the first principle is to collect all the relevant data necessary to your inquiry, correct?
Correct.
That would be in a cause and origin. To determine the origin, you need to collect all the relevant data, right?
Correct.
In terms of the cause and the causal factors, you need to consider all the relevant data.
Correct.
That's embodied in the scientific method, isn't it?
Yes.
In fact, 921 speaks of the scientific method in chapter 4, doesn't it?
I believe that's the chapter.
Chapter 4?
Yes.
All right, and I've got that for you, so you don't have to worry about it. Chapter 4 would be Exhibit K in the exhibit book. You with me?
Yes.
And first talks about what the scientific method is, and it is actually a step-by-step methodology, right?
Yes.
To ensure that you have quality, reliable results, right?
Yes.
That's how you've been trained.
Yes.
That's what you teach. Have you taught?
Yes.
All right. So one of the things we look at, and there is a chart, if I can find it here, of the scientific method. It sets forth the different steps in the scientific method, right?
Correct.
First thing you have to do is define the problem, what you're trying to achieve, right?
Yes.
Then you have to collect all of the relevant data necessary for that task, correct?
Correct.
Once you collect the data, then you analyze the data for its relevance and importance,
Correct.
right? Not all evidence has the same importance, fair?
Yes.
Some are completely irrelevant,
Some.
and some are critical.
Yes.
You have to be able to look at the data and then analyze that for its importance, right?
Correct.
The scientific method tells us only after doing that can you develop a hypothesis, correct?
Correct.
It's a step-by-step process, right?
Yes.
Unless you collect all the relevant data, you can't analyze the data. Fair?
You have to collect all the data that's available to you
And relevant
and relevant.
to your inquiry.
Yes.
Can we agree that unless you collect all the relevant data, you don't have all the data to analyze?
Well, you don't know what data is there.
You don't know what's not there unless you collect it,
Correct.
right? I mean, it sounds reasonable to you, right?
You have to collect the data that's available to you.
And then analyze that data, and unless you collect the data, you can't analyze it.
Correct.
Then once you analyze it, you develop a hypothesis, correct?
Yes.
Hypothesis or hypotheses, depending, right?
Correct.
All right. Then the next step is to test that hypothesis or hypotheses, and it says rigorous testing, right?
It does.
So can we agree that unless you collect the data, you can't analyze the data, and if you haven't analyzed the data, you can't develop a hypothesis?
Correct.
You certainly can't develop a hypothesis, there's nothing to test. Fair?
Correct.
All right. So one of the principles, collect all the relevant data. Second principle of being a fire investigator and a person of ethics is to kind of keep an open book of your activities, writing down what you've done, how you've done it, how you arrived at your conclusions, right?
Yes.
So that other people, your peers, can review your work,
Yes.
right? Do you understand what peer review is?
Yes.
Peer review is where you submit your work and somebody anonymously reviews it to see if you complied with the methodology and you have valid results, right?
That's peer review, yes.
That's peer review. You've never had a peer review of your work in this case, have you?
I've never had peer review, and very
Peer
few
review.
fire investigators, unless they're in the research, have peer review. Real fire investigation doesn't get peer review, they
Okay.
get technical review.
Let's get this question and answer. You, in your entire career, have never had one of your work product, your reports, peer
I'm going to
reviewed.
object, Your Honor. I believe it's asked and answered. Sergeant Leroy did in fact answer the question, and I don't think Mr. Leroy likes the response, but he answered the
You
question.
can answer a simple yes or
I
no.
was just unclear whether he was talking about in this case or in his career, so
First of all, you didn't have a peer review in this case.
No,
You've never had a peer review where somebody anonymously reviewed your work in any case of yours, correct?
no,
Am I correct?
you are correct.
All right. There's technical reviews
Yes,
where people, bosses or other people in your department might look at your work, right?
correct,
And decide and help you or just point out either shortcomings or say, yeah, you did a good job.
correct.
In the Michigan State Police, if somebody technically reviews your work, do they have to sign off on it?
Yes,
Was there a sign off in this case? Because I didn't see one.
there was.
Who signed off on it?
It would have been electronically.
Who signed off on it electronically that we can look at a document to say?
Reviewing, oops,
And that would be Exhibit B, and then there's a couple supplements.
well, the B that's, the person that signed off on it, let's see, would have been Lieutenant Thompson,
Thompson, what's his first name?
Larry.
Is he still around?
No,
Is he retired?
yes,
He's still alive?
I have no idea.
All right. So, the second, and we talked about how you have to kind of have an open book. You want people to be, you want to be confident that anybody can look at my work product and see I complied with the scientific method, right?
Correct.
The third one, as a principle, fundamental principle of being a fire investigator is to take your hypotheses and have a good faith effort to try to disprove the hypotheses, correct?
Yes,
Because part of the scientific method, it's not trying to prove up your hypothesis, it's disproving your hypothesis, right?
yes,
NFPA 921 talks about it.
correct,
Fundamental part of the scientific method, right?
correct.
And when we talk about, when I say good faith, I basically play devil's advocate with yourself, right?
Correct.
Here's the evidence I have that might support this. Here's the other evidence that might go against it. And if you have evidence going against it, you need to be able to resolve it. But again, playing devil's advocate, right?
Correct.
And be open-minded to changing your conclusion on your hypothesis.
Correct.
And if, for example, your hypothesis is disproved, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, you have to go develop a new hypothesis,
Correct.
which is why we have the loops going on the left side, right?
Yes.
Test your hypothesis. Maybe go back and collect more data. Maybe reanalyze the data. Develop a new hypothesis, right?
Yes.
All right. There are things that NFPA cautions against as we talk about the scientific method, right? And one of the things is avoiding presumption, section 4.3.8, and that's in chapter 4, Your Honor, which is Exhibit K. And tell me if I read this correctly. This is an important part of scientific method, right?
Yes.
Which you need to comply with, right?
Yes.
Until data have been collected, no specific hypothesis can be reasonably formed or tested. You know what reasonably means, right? Reasonable?
Yes.
In accordance with reason and common sense.
Yes?
Common sense and reason tells us unless you collect the data, you can't analyze it, right?
Correct?
All investigations of fire and explosion incidents should be approached by the investigator without presumption as to origin, ignition sequence, cause, fire spread, or responsibility for the incident until the use of the scientific method has yielded testable hypotheses, which cannot be disproved by rigorous testing. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
That's something you agree with?
Yes.
It's something that has to be complied with in order to be consistent with the scientific method,
Yes.
right? Because if you're not consistent with the scientific method, if you skip one of those steps, you don't have a reliable methodology, do you?
Correct.
There's also a couple different things. 4.3.9, and that's expectation bias. You've heard of that, right?
Yes.
Expectation bias is a well-established phenomenon that occurs in scientific analysis when investigators reach a premature conclusion without having examined or considered all of the relevant data. Did I read that right?
Yes.
So instead of collecting and examining all of the data in a logical and unbiased manner to reach a scientifically reliable conclusion, the investigator uses the premature determination to dictate investigative processes, analyses, and ultimately conclusions in a way that is not scientifically valid. Did I read that correct?
You did.
And you agree with that?
Yes.
And you can't do that. That's a big no-no.
Yes.
The introduction of expectation bias into the investigation results in the use of only data that supports the previously formed conclusion and often results in the misinterpretation and or discarding of data that does not support the original opinions. Or read that right?
Yes.
Excuse me, you agree with that?
Yes.
That's a big no-no. Disregarding relevant evidence.
Correct.
Right? Because it doesn't comport with your already determined decision.
Yes.
Investigators are strongly cautioned to avoid expectation bias through the proper use of the scientific method, correct?
Yes.
You agree with that?
Yes.
All right. There's also something called confirmation bias that's really important in the scientific method, 4.3.10. Confirmation bias occurs when the investigator relies exclusively on data that supports the hypothesis and fails to look for, ignores, or dismisses contradictory or non-supporting data. You read that right?
Yes.
You agree with it?
Yes.
Big no-no, right?
Yes.
Can't do that, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, you're violating the scientific method,
Correct.
which would result in an unreliable methodology.
Yes.
The failure to consider alternate or opposing hypotheses or prematurely discounting seemingly contradictory data without appropriate analysis can result in incorrect conclusions. Are you that right?
Yes.
You agree with it?
Yes.
Big no-no?
Yes.
Results in a violation of the scientific method?
Yes.
Results in an unreliable methodology?
Correct.
Right. Results ultimately in your opinion getting stricken, right, if you have an unreliable methodology.
Not my opinion.
All right. Oh, your opinions don't get stricken or not? That's not your
That's
opinion?
not my job to strike my opinion.
All right. A hypothesis can be said to be valid only when rigorous testing has failed to disprove the hypothesis. Read that right?
Yes.
You agree with that?
Yes.
Big no-no if you don't do rigorous testing, right?
Yes.
And we're not talking about testing like, here's my hypothesis, yeah, that's right. In the 2 nanoseconds it takes to say, yeah, that's right. That's not rigorous testing, is it?
That is not rigorous testing.
Rigorous testing is what we talked about, playing devil's advocate with all the evidence that might contradict your
Correct.
hypothesis, right?
Correct.
Right. Disproving the hypothesis is a process in which all of the evidence is compared against the proffered hypothesis in an effort to find why the hypothesis is not true. Read that right?
Yes.
You agree with that's how you're supposed to do it.
Yes.
If you don't do it, you're violating the scientific method.
Yes.
If you violate the scientific method, you have an unreliable methodology. Fair?
Yes.
So, in this particular case, there's also something I want to talk about too. something called negative corpus. I'm sure you've heard of it. 4.3.6.1. You with me?
Yes.
Come on aboard. Any hypothesis that is incapable of being tested either physically or analytically is an invalid hypothesis. You agree with that?
Yes.
That's a big no-no, right? To
Yes.
have a hypothesis that can't even be tested, right?
Correct.
Violates the scientific method.
Yes.
Results in an unreliable methodology.
Correct.
A hypothesis developed based on the absence of data is an example of a hypothesis that is incapable of being tested. You agree with that?
Yes.
You apply that in your field, correct?
Yes.
You believe that's a big no-no if you violate that.
Yes.
It results in an unreliable methodology because it is in violation of the scientific method. Fair?
Correct.
The inability to refute a hypothesis does not mean that the hypothesis is true. You agree with that?
Yes.
Just because you can't necessarily refute it doesn't make yours automatically correct.
Correct.
That's why we do that devil's advocate testing, right?
Yes.
You agree with it, and to violate that, to just say, well, I couldn't refute it, therefore mine's true, that violates the scientific method, right?
Yes.
Resulting in an unreliable methodology.
Correct.
Now let's talk about a little bit of what you did in this particular case. First of all, you got a call on January 7 in the year of our Lord 2007, correct?
Correct.
And it was about, I'm going to say dinner time, a little bit after dinner time you got there,
Correct.
6:30-ish.
Yeah, about 6 o'clock. So when I arrived on scene.
January 7, it'd be dark at 6 o'clock, right?
Yes.
All your photos anyways were in the dark, so I assume you got there in the dark.
Correct.
You found out where Todd Sturmo was located outside the house on the ground,
Yes.
and you examined, not maybe touched him, but you saw him,
Yes.
saw the people who were there.
Yes.
And your job, you got assigned to do an origin and cause investigation, correct?
Correct.
So part of your job during that time was to take pictures of the house and the evidence in the case, fair?
Yes.
So exhibit, excuse me. If we look at, hold on, Your Honor. Photos, exhibit V, and then we'll talk about W after that. You took a bunch of photos, but I put in a select number that we can talk about, okay? Exhibit V.
Yes.
And I hope
That's
all
V
these-
as in Victor, correct?
Pardon, I put stickers on the bottom, like
Okay.
0039, because you took a bunch. You see those?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, it just happened to go toward the back. Let me get to the front. In Your Honor, I'll caution, some of these are Todd Sturmer, they're important to this hearing. First picture I put is 0020. See that?
Yes.
Picture of Todd Sturmer and his legs, right?
Yes.
And you saw that there were the gray sweatpants down by the ankles, and you could see he's wearing sweat socks.
Correct.
All right. As you learned during the course of your investigation, when the people who first found Todd Sturmer, they found Linda Sturmer lying on top of him, crying, hugging him.
Yes.
Right. And those people were Mike Matheny and Connie Calhoun. You remember that?
Yes.
Right. And the clothes he had were the sweatpants and the socks and the underwear. Right. Clothes he had on.
I don't know for sure what clothes he had on prior to the fire. I know what he had when I examined him at this point.
But part of your investigation in collecting all the relevant data is determining what clothes he would have had on at the time of the fire, right?
I know the clothes he had at this time.
Are you telling this court that as part of your data collection for origin and cause that you didn't determine what kind of clothes he had on, beyond what we see, let's say sweatpants, underwear, and socks, what he was wearing at the time of the fire?
I don't recall asking those specific questions. I don't recall reviewing any reports of what his exact. There was mentioned in a report, I can't tell you, of what he was wearing.
Let me see if I can jog your memory. Was there in your report the testimony, the statements of Mike Matheny and Connie Calhoun that in fact, basically he was naked other than the sweats and the socks?
I did not interview Mike Matheny.
Didn't ask you that. Did you learn in the course of your investigation in terms of data collection that he had no clothes on when they arrived other than what you see around his ankles?
Correct.
All right. That was important to you. That's important data, right?
Yes.
And you also learned during the course of your investigation that Linda Sturmer was seen hugging him, crying, screaming when they got there.
Yes.
You also learned in the course of your investigation that Mr. Matheny and Connie Calhoun got clothes out of Matheny's truck, his work truck, and they put it on him, for privacy, to cover him up.
Correct.
All right. And that's some of the stuff we see in 20, right?
Yes.
And then we see, as we go to 22, which is a photo of Todd Sturmer's back, right?
Yes.
His legs, lower legs, right?
Yes.
Which is 26. Next photo. Once you got done with the house, when you got done looking at Mr. Sturmer and investigating and seeing the evidence on Mr. Sturmer, then you went to a house inspection, or you did the house stuff first?
No, I went to documented Mr. Sturmer first.
All right. Next thing you did was an exterior investigation, correct?
A preliminary exterior investigation.
Understand, it's dark outside, you don't have the equipment, you just get called to the scene, you're just trying to kind of get the lay of the land, fair?
Correct.
Which is in accordance with the scientific method.
Yes.
Try to document at least what you can see as close to the scene of the incident as you can, fair?
Yes.
Right. So you took pictures, and we'll see a couple more pictures, but here's a picture of the front of the house, right?
Yes.
And particularly, you saw a gas can in the front of the house, correct?
Correct.
At the time, you didn't consider that important, relevant evidence, correct?
At that point, I didn't know if it was important or not.
So you didn't collect it?
I did not.
Right. You don't err on the side of collecting as much evidence as you can?
That's impractical if you think that I can't collect everything I see.
Well, have you ever heard when you take pictures, you can't take too many pictures, you can only take too few pictures?
Correct?
Because later on, when you need an important picture, I didn't take that picture. I know I saw it, right?
Correct?
So if you had, since you discarded that night and didn't collect it, that could have been gone the next morning if that was important evidence, right?
That would be possible.
Fortunately for you, it was present the next morning.
It was there the next morning.
All right. And you also notice, if we look at 37, and 39, you see blood on the bumper of this van.
Correct?
You came to understand that that was Linda Sturmer's van, or the Sturmer family van.
Correct?
You knew that, and you saw blood on the ground, 44.
Yes?
And that's all stuff, these are all your photos, right?
Yes.
All right, 45 is a picture of the back of the house. You can see it's snowing and it's nasty out on the ground, right?
Yes.
Muddy? Yes? Muddy?
Yes?
All right. So you did that, and that's the extent of your investigation basically that night, because you were kind of limited with the darkness in your equipment.
Correct.
You go back, and as part of your methodology is to go back the next day as soon as you can, which you did,
Yes?
in the morning on the 8th.
Yes.
And you took more photographs, correct?
I did.
Right. By the way, just as a way of background, you wrote a report, which is Exhibit B. You testified in preliminary exam about origin and cause. Remember that?
Yes?
When you testified at the preliminary exam under penalty of perjury, did you tell the truth?
Yes?
When you testified at the trial in January of 2010, January, and I'll say it's January 7th of 2010, testified in trial, you remember that?
Yes.
Did you review that testimony getting ready for today?
Not getting ready for today, no.
You reviewed the testimony?
I have reviewed it.
When you swore to tell the truth under oath under the penalty of perjury, did you?
Yes.
You also, 8 years later, testified in an evidentiary hearing in October of 2018, isn't that correct?
Yes.
October 25, 2018, right?
Yes.
And you were subjected to questions and you were under oath, right?
Yes.
And you swore to tell the truth
Yes.
under penalty of perjury,
Yes.
and you did tell the truth.
Yes.
Right. So getting back to January 8th, excuse me, let me go back to the first picture. January 8th, that's a picture of what would be the south side of the house?
Nope, try again.
You try again.
West side of the house.
West side of the house. And that's, you see that bay window part on the second floor and the main floor?
Yes.
This is a walkout basement, right?
Yes.
So the surface we're seeing where the blue is, that's actually the basement, right?
Say that again?
You see where the blue, blue thing is on the left side by the
Oh,
fire?
yes.
By
yes,
the
that's-
barbecue?
That's the walkout basement.
Right. And above that's the first floor?
Yes.
Right. And that, sir, is the first floor and the second floor and the bay window, right?
In the middle?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. That's basically the living room on the first floor.
Yes.
And above it's an open ceiling.
Yes.
Right? And you're taking pictures, one on the outside, and then later on in the inside.
Correct?
Part of what you're trying to do is scientific method, right?
Yes.
What you've been taught,
Yes.
what you've taught
Yes.
to others, right?
Yes.
Because you want to collect as much data relevant to this investigation as you can, correct?
Correct.
Okay. See if we can get this up. Anyway, you walked around, you did a walk around, correct?
Yes.
Right. And then from there, and that included aerial photographs, right?
Yes.
You actually got on a fire truck on a ladder and took pictures overhead.
Yes.
And those pictures are, for the record, Your Honor, Exhibit W. We have various pictures overhead, right? And pictures of the inside and outside.
The overhead picture? Is that, I'm
I don't have my
trying to catch
book.
up.
No, that's all right. We're just working through the picture. I just want to see in Exhibit W from January 8th. You
Yes.
see overhead pictures, right?
Yeah, and looks like 0096 and 0101 are overhead photos.
Okay. And what we had was, in those pictures, you kind of, through your understanding of the facts, narrowed the area of origin to the living room.
Say that again?
You narrowed your area of origin. You determined that the area of origin was the living room.
How is that related to this photo or unrelated to this
No,
photo?
just in general.
Yes,
Through your investigation.
yes, through my investigation, I
Through
determined
your
the area of
investigation. Good question. Through your investigation, collecting all the data and the facts, you determined that the area of origin was the living room.
Correct.
I don't know why I would not do this. Give me a quick second, Your Honor. Okay. Mortimer, we're back. All right, so you took pictures, and this is the basement, right, that you're standing in.
That's how I'm standing, yes.
Right. And you see all this debris. And exhibit page 68 would be your third page. You see that?
68. Oh, 68. Yes,
That's a bunch of debris on the living room, on the floor of the basement, right?
correct?
Right. That's all important stuff that you need to take pictures of. You're collecting data, correct?
Correct.
And here is the next picture is an aerial, you above, And that's important because now you can kind of get a, not a 30,000-foot view, but a way better view of the area you're looking at, right?
Correct.
Right. And that would show what was the living room, and that's all in the basement.
Correct.
Next picture shows an aerial, shows the first floor fireplace, does it not?
Yes.
Right. And the first floor fireplace was intact, you see the framing,
Correct.
right? That was important in your conclusion, right?
Correct.
Did you check out the flue for the fireplace?
I checked out the chimney, correct.
The chimney?
Yes.
Did you check the flue?
I examined the fireplace, including the flue.
Did you go in the basement and check the big flue, the metal pipe that was in there? Check any of that?
I don't know if we're talking about the same thing. I examined all the chimney pipe that was attached to the top of that wood stove that was found in the basement.
And what we're looking at is page, or photo 161, or 101. See that?
Yes.
And the next page is 116.
Yes?
Yes. That's the gas can, correct?
Correct?
And you ended up taking a picture, a closer picture, as we see the next one, correct?
Yes.
We just lost it again. And that's 117, a picture of the gas can, right?
Correct?
All right. All right. That gas can you see has a spout that's broken. You see that?
Yes.
Do you know if that gas can, part of your data collection, was in the same exact spot in the morning before as it was the night before?
Exact spot? No.
Do you know where the gas can had been before you saw it at night?
No.
All right. In fact, you testified at the trial that you did not know where the gas can had been and how it got there, fair?
Correct. Yes.
Still don't know to this day
So how it got there?
how it got
I
there,
do not know.
how long it had been there.
No.
And then you also talked about not only the fire can, but you also had some understanding of the facts of the case as you were determining your origin, right?
Yes.
The facts that you had learned was that Linda Sturmer was in the basement doing some clothes.
Correct.
Doing laundry, and then she heard a scream from her husband.
Correct?
You knew that they were the only two people in the house.
Yes.
She heard a scream, and she ran upstairs
Yes.
and saw Todd Sturmer on fire.
Correct.
And there were some other things on fire in the living room, right?
Correct.
That was part of the information you took and assumed to be true in order to develop your hypothesis that the living room was in fact the area of origin,
That was some of the data I used.
right? You didn't have any reason to contradict Linda Sturmer that she was in the basement, heard her husband scream, ran up, and when she got to the top of the stairs, she saw Todd Sturmer.
That was correct.
Now, you weren't able to narrow the area of origin any more than the living room, correct?
That's correct.
And you understand an exhibit, Your Honor, exhibit X is a floor plan of the Sturmer house. You have that, sir?
Yes.
You know that that's 18 by 18 with the living room, right? You can look for those dimensions.
Yes.
And you knew that some of the things that were in the living room included the TV, He was watching, had been watching TV in the living room?
I remember, yes, I remember hearing that, yes.
So that's a fuel load.
Yes,
You have to account for that, right?
yes,
One of the things was a recliner chair that he was in.
yes,
Yeah. Another thing was him,
yes,
for lack of a better term, he was a fuel load,
yes,
right? Okay. And as you collected this data, once you determined that that the origin, you couldn't narrow down any more to 18 by 18, right?
correct,
But NFPA also tells us we live in a three-dimensional world, right?
correct,
So that, and by the way, it's 18 by 18 is just that rectangle. There's a little bay window area. You know how to calculate the area for that?
yes, I can calculate area.
How can you do that? How do you calculate the area of the bay window area? Because you want to know that that's part of the living room, right?
You would divide it up into two triangles and a rectangle, and then do the calculations from there.
Can you do that
Yes.
in front of us?
I'd probably have to recall, use Google to help me out with the formulas for area of a triangle.
Seeing as we live in a 3D world and NFPA talks about that, right? You had open ceilings, that's another 20 feet, 2 stories.
Yes.
So you're talking about basically 20 by 20 by 20, right?
Well, 18 by 18 too. I don't know how high
A
the
little bit
ceiling is.
more for the bay area,
Yes,
roughly 20 by 20, don't have
Okay.
the exact, right?
yes,
All right, 20 by 20 in a volume, which you know, we live in a 3D world, 20 feet for the high ceilings, right?
I don't know the exact height of the ceilings.
You didn't try to determine that
No, I did not.
as part of something that might be of importance to you in your data collection.
No.
Once you determined that the area of origin was the living room, now you go to the cause, correct?
Correct.
All right. And let's make sure I'm clear. Tell me if I'm wrong. Well, unless you're in the right origin, you're not going to find their cause,
Correct.
right? If you're looking in the wrong spot, right?
Correct.
So once you did that, then we have to go to the cause, correct?
Correct.
And cause, as you know from exhibit 19, or strike that, chapter 19 of the book, Your Honor, is exhibit O. Are you with me?
Yes.
Okay. Chapter 19 speaks directly to the things you need to consider in terms of developing the cause, correct?
Correct.
For example, 4.4.3.1, you see that?
Say that again?
I'm sorry. Let me talk about, I'll go back to 4.4.3.1, 4.4, chapter 4 is K in the book.
Okay.
There are things
That's a scientific method chart, the one that you just rattled off there?
That's
Okay, all right.
yeah, it's the methodology.
Okay.
Chapter 4.
I'm sorry, where are you now?
We are in Exhibit K. You tell me when you're ready, sir, and Your Honor.
Okay.
4.4.3.1 tells us the fundamental purpose of conducting an examination of any incident scene is to collect all of the available data and document the incident scene, right?
You said 4.3.1?
Yes.
Are you with me, sir?
Yes.
Four point 4.3.1. The fundamental purpose of conducting an examination of any incident scene is to collect all of the available data and document the incident scene.
Yes.
Right? So, which is what, and it applies the scientific method, just so we're clear, to every aspect of what you do, correct?
Correct.
scientific method in determining the origin,
Yes.
and then the scientific method in determining the cause.
Yes.
All right. So we know that that's one of the things that talks about data collection, right,
Yes.
in the book, which you claim you adhere to.
Yes.
Because if you didn't adhere to that, you're not adhering to the scientific method, right?
Correct.
In which case you have an unreliable methodology. Fair?
Correct.
4.3.8, we talked about avoiding presumption until after all data is collected, right?
Yes.
4.4 says, I should strike that, 4.4.4, are you with me?
Yes.
Says, valuable physical evidence should be recognized, documented, properly collected, and preserved for further testing and evaluation or courtroom presentation, right?
Yes.
So in other words, you need to collect that data in order to properly analyze it, like we talked about.
Correct.
All right. Then let's go to section 18.3.2, and Your Honor, chapter 18 is exhibit N in the book.
Eighteen three two.
3.2, and I'll put it on here since I'm finally back up. It's on the screen, you see there. Fire scene excavation, the examination, layering, and removal of debris, and reconstruction allows the investigator to observe patterns on exposed surfaces and to locate evidence that can assist in making an accurate origin analysis. You see that?
Yes.
Then it says, the purpose of fire scene reconstruction is to recreate as nearly as practicable the pre-fire positions of contents and structural components, right?
Yes.
Interviews, diagrams, photographs, and other means can be helpful in establishing pre-fire conditions, right?
Correct.
You did not do any reconstruction like we've seen in cases where you start establishing where everything was pre-fire.
I did that to the scene.
Did you take a photograph of your reconstruction?
I did not. I know, but I did excavate the scene.
All right, we'll talk about that. And since we talked about 18.3.2, we'll go to the next one, 18.3.3, or 2.3, excavation. And that's 18.3.2.3, you see that?
Yes.
Adequate debris removal is essential for a thorough fire investigation. Inadequate removal of debris and the resultant exposure of limited portions of the fire patterns and other evidence may lead to an incorrect analysis. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
To a point.
To what point don't you agree with?
There are some scenes that are just impossible to excavate.
Was this one of them?
No.
All right. So, have you ever written to NFPA 921 committee, said there are some things you should need to change that because there are some scenes that you can't excavate?
I have not.
A fire scene investigation normally involves dirty and strenuous work. You gotta agree with that.
Yes.
Tough job, right?
Yes.
And if you're not willing to do that dirty and strenuous work, you shouldn't be in the business, right?
Correct.
Acceptance of this fact is essential in conducting a proper fire investigation. Did I read that right?
Yes.
Okay. Then if we go to 19.3, NFPA talks about collecting data for cause. There we go off again. Data, and that's, Your Honor, 19 is Exhibit O. You let me know when you're ready, sir.
What section?
19.3.
Yes.
It says data collection processes for fire cause determination include identification of fuel packages, ignition sources, oxidizers, and circumstances associated with how the fuel and ignition source came together. See that?
Yes.
Because what these are are the cause factor to determine the cause of a fire, right?
Correct.
It's what you've learned you need to do, correct?
Correct.
And it's how you've been taught
Yes.
and how you teach people.
Yes.
Cause factors, starting with 19.1, tells you this chapter recommends a methodology to follow in determining the cause, right?
Yes.
Then it says, fire cause determination is the process of identifying the first fuel ignited, the ignition source, the oxidizing agent, and the circumstances that resulted in the fire, right?
Yes.
And of course, as you said, it has to follow the origin.
Yes.
You can't do it backwards.
Correct.
Generally, a fire cause determination can be considered reliable only if the origin has been correctly determined. We talked about that.
Yes.
Right. Then 19.1.1 says, and it lists out what the causal factors are, correct? Yes?
Yes.
First factor is you need an ignition source, correct?
Correct.
Second factor is you need to identify the first fuel ignited.
Correct.
What caught fire, right?
Correct.
Third one is, once you've figured out the ignition source and the first fuel ignited, how did they come together?
Correct.
Well, you need an oxidant, but that's air.
Yes.
We'll say oxidant, just to be sure. And fourth, how did they come together, the circumstances, right?
Yes.
You can only determine that by developing hypotheses, right?
Correct.
Rigorously testing them, right?
Correct.
You can only develop hypotheses, as you told us, after you've analyzed the data.
Correct.
You can only analyze the data after you've collected the data.
Correct.
Until you collect the data, you can't analyze it.
Correct.
Until you analyze it, you can't develop a hypothesis.
Yes.
And then if you can't test it unless you develop a hypothesis.
Correct.
There's also something that talks about some other sources that I want to talk to you about, if we may. Kirk's, which you said is one of the authorities and reference sources. And Your Honor, Kirk's is S, Exhibit S. And at page 379 of Kirk's, it talks about layering, doesn't it?
I'm sorry, it talks about what?
Oh, I'm sorry, 379. We're talking about data collection, right?
Okay.
And you see 379, is that you have a blue page up
Yes.
there, color page? One of the things that 1033 tells us you need to do is excavate, right?
Yes.
And if you don't excavate, you're not complying with 1033, right?
Again,
If you
yes, for most scenes you excavate.
Well, 4.2.6 of 1033, which sets forth the minimum requirements and is a standard, right?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Says you have to excavate, dig out an origin area that will contain an ignition source and items of evidence, because you need to find the ignition source in the first fuel.
Yes.
Then 4.7, which is down toward the bottom of that, says you need to reconstruct the area of origin, right?
Yes.
A requirement, a standard, correct?
Yes.
A minimum job requirement in order to do your job, finding the origin and cause, correct?
Correct.
All right. So that all protected areas, fire patterns are identified and correlated to content or structural remains, right?
Correct.
All right. There's also another page in Kirk's, and I want to talk about Kirk's, which was Exhibit S, and talked about layering. Remember layering?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I have to use the restroom. Is it okay if I continue in this? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt Mr. Mueller. It's just,
I am nothing if not a gentleman.
thank you. I'm so sorry.
Sure, we'll take a break.
Okay, I apologize.
It's okay.
Thank you.
We won't let Jay have any more water. I was gonna give him the water bottle. Fresh water. Thank you.
Show you this case that we talked about last night. I haven't read it.
My apologies, Mr. Thank you.
That's quite all right, sir.
Yeah, just take the water bottle from him, please.
Thank you, John.
You may continue, Mr.
Thank you, Your Honor. We talked about the various 19.1.1, all the causal factors you need to identify, right?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
We also talked about Kirk's and how it talks about the 1033 requirements, right, which are
Yes.
standards. And also, Kirk's also talks about layering, and if we look at, what would be page 403,
Yes.
you know what layering is?
Yes.
Part of the excavation process, isn't it?
Correct.
Talks about removing, especially when you have heavy damage, right? You take things off from the top and layer it in layers, right?
Correct.
That's how you've been taught.
Yes.
That's what you teach,
Yes.
right? Important in terms of data collection, right?
Yes.
Because you don't know what you don't know until you start looking, fair?
Correct.
At scenes where there's been significant destruction and collapse of furniture, walls, or ceilings, investigators will be well advised to process at least the most critical portions in layers. Did I read that right?
Yes.
Right. In this case, the critical portions obviously are the living room,
Correct.
which is in the basement.
Yes.
And when you testified there was 2 feet of debris in the basement. You remember that?
I don't remember the testimony, but I remember the about 2 feet of debris in the basement.
Right. You testified in trial on January 7th, and Your Honor, just for the record, his trial testimony is Exhibit D as in David. On page 195, you remember testifying in trial? Sir, do you remember testifying in trial?
Yes.
Under oath?
Yes.
Under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
You told the truth?
Yes.
Page 195, referring back to People's Exhibit 51, looking in, you can see there's debris. 2 feet on the ground, you see that?
Yes.
You say, well, there's a lot of debris there. But remember, the 2 feet of debris is what used to be the first floor, the furniture and contents of the first floor. And the roof, the trusses, the roof decking, the shingles have all burned up enough so there's only a couple of feet of debris. You see debris in all your sites, don't you?
Yes.
All right. You have to collect data in the area of origin and look at the debris, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall testifying, sir, in the evidentiary hearing that you didn't see any you did not see any evidentiary value in the basement? That's why you didn't look at the debris in the basement. And the evidentiary hearing, Your Honor, for the record, is Exhibit E. You remember testifying in an evidentiary hearing in October of 2018
Yes.
in federal court.
Yes.
When you swore to tell the truth, did you tell the truth?
Yes.
All right, if we talk about here, when you, and the line 6, you see that?
Yes.
When you could indicate you couldn't get to any place to take samples, is that right? Is that the reason you didn't take samples? And you said, I took samples of the gray sweatpants, but that was from outside, right?
Correct.
The question was in the house. And the court kind of admonished you, just answer the question. Answer. The reason I didn't take samples is I didn't see anything of evidentiary value. Was that the truth when you were asked that question?
Yes.
Is that the truth today?
That is the truth. Yes.
Also, the next page, we're at the top of the page. I want to show exhibit, that's page 88 from Exhibit E, as in Edward. You with me?
Yes.
You can read it on the screen. This debris you're referring to, that 2 feet, do you collect any of the debris? Answer, no. Question, why not? Answer, because there was no evidentiary value to it. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Was that the truth when you were asked that question and gave that answer?
Yes.
The reason you didn't collect any data and do any excavation in the basement was because you didn't see any evidentiary value.
I did do excavation in the basement.
Well, then where is it in your report that you excavated the basement?
You will not find it in my report.
It's not in your report?
I forgot to put that in my report.
Did you forget to testify to it at the evidentiary hearing when you said you didn't collect any of the debris because you didn't see any evidentiary value?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. Are we talking about the excavation or the collection of debris? Because we're talking about two different things here.
No, we're not. We're talking about collecting evidence in the basement.
Well, one involves digging and one involves collecting. So, I mean, they're two different things. He's testified he excavated the scene. So the question we have to then ask ourselves is, did he collect any samples? They're two different things.
Why don't you ask the witness his
Let's
definition of
clarify
excavating
this.
so we
Did
have
you,
that cleared
you know
up?
how you do excavation with tools?
Yes.
Did you do that?
Yes.
Where is that in your report?
It is not.
Where are the photographs that show any of the excavation?
It does not.
You took detailed notes and you said you complied with, one, the Department of Justice standard of contemporaneous, taking accurate, detailed notes and documenting your work, right? Right?
Yes. Yes.
So people can review it, correct?
Correct.
So am I correct? We don't have any photographs of your excavation of the stuff in the basement.
That's correct.
And we don't have any notes in your report, correct?
Of the
That you
excavation?
excavated?
Correct.
And we don't have any statements of evidence you obtained in the basement from the living room that support your ignition and cause, correct?
Statements in,
Do we have any statements in any of your reports?
statements, say that again.
I don't understand that question either.
Do we have any of your statements in your report, not witness statements, your statement, that you did some excavation and this is what I found?
No.
So somebody like Mr. Trinkle or anybody else who has knowledge of what you do wouldn't be able to determine what you did to get to your results, correct?
By looking at the photographs, probably not.
And by looking at your report.
Correct.
So the only testimony we would have, the only evidence we would have in any hearing, would you be saying so, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree with me that when you testified at the preliminary exam in 2010, or 2009 I think it was, you never mentioned anything about excavation?
But there's also evidence in somebody else's testimony.
Listen to my question
Okay.
very carefully. We're talking about what you did in your methodology in this case. There's nothing in your preliminary exam testimony, and that would be Exhibit C from June 24, 2009, that talks about excavation or collection of evidence in the basement in the living room. Fair?
I have not reviewed my testimony from my prelim, but that would probably be fair.
There's nothing in your trial testimony from January 7, 2010, Exhibit D, that mentions I excavated the basement and here's the evidence I found in the living room from the basement from that
I did
2
not
feet.
find any evidence in the house.
The only evidence, did you just say I didn't find any evidence in the house? Right now?
Located it? Correct.
And can we agree that Exhibit E, the transcript from the evidentiary hearing of October 25, 2018, never mentions you did any excavation in the basement in the living room?
If it's not there, I'll agree with it.
Can you agree part of what you need to do is accurate documentation? We talked about that already, right?
Yes.
And it's a standard of practice in your business to have accurate documentation.
Correct.
And in fact, in this case, you didn't do that in terms of the excavation in the basement and collecting of evidence in the basement. Fair?
I would have, since I did not collect evidence in the basement, I wouldn't have documented it.
You did not document anything. Fair?
I did not document post-excavation.
Did you have field notes? You know what field notes are,
I
right?
do have field notes.
Handwritten notes.
Correct.
Have you turned those over to the prosecutor?
They have everything.
Pardon? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What did you say?
Yes, they have everything.
Okay.
Would your field notes indicate that you did excavation?
No.
So again, we have nothing but your testimony.
Correct. And an additional report from Mr. James Shinsky, who
I'm
followed.
talking about your methodology and what you did.
But you asked if there's no other record of that excavation, but there is a record.
Listen to me very carefully. You testified that you came to your conclusions right after January 12th.
Correct.
Do you understand that Mr. Shinsky didn't do his excavation or any type of investigation until the 15th?
Yes.
So your conclusions were set in stone before he did in the investigation of the scene.
No,
Fair?
they weren't set in stone. I was always open to get more data, as we call it.
And
So
you
it
still
wasn't,
are.
and I still am.
You still are. Good. Well, let's talk about then your methodology and what you considered and didn't consider, okay? If I look at your report from page, I believe it's the conclusion, might be the last page of your report, and that would be Exhibit B as in boy. Remember that? with me?
Yes,
Okay.
the last page of my report, my original
Where it
report.
says cause?
Yes,
Because after you collect the data, you analyze the data, you come to hypotheses, right?
yes,
And you set forth your conclusions based on your hypotheses, right?
correct,
And the rigorous testing of your hypotheses.
Correct.
And your consideration of alternate hypotheses, correct?
correct,
All right. So if we look at what your cause is, you relied on the unburned and less burned structural members around the fireplace. This can eliminate a malfunction of the fireplace, right?
correct,
And given the time of day, let's figure this out. The time of day, the complete destruction of the living room floor and roof would be inconsistent with any accidental fire. The presence of gasoline on the victim makes this an arson fire. That's your conclusion, correct?
correct,
And that's pretty much what you testified to at the preliminary exam, right?
yes,
What you testified to at trial.
yes,
So let me make sure. We talked about origin and data, collecting right and reliable evidence. Yes?
yes,
We had time of day. We had, I think you said destruction of the floor, right?
yes,
And the ceiling and whatnot, right? And we had presence of gas on Todd's thermon sweatbands, right?
correct,
Tell me, sir, let's look at the first factor that went into your cause. And did you do a detailed report, and that's the result of your detailed report, that cause?
this is my report,
Is that the result of your detailed analysis, and your detailed analysis is reflected in the cause?
yes,
Can we agree, sir, that when we talked about the causal factors, we talked about ignition source, right?
yes,
We talked about first fuel ignited.
yes,
We talked about oxidant, which
Yes.
in most cases air.
yes,
And we talked about the circumstances that brought them together.
yes,
Those are the causal factors you need to identify in the area of origin. Fair?
correct,
That's how you've been taught.
yes,
That's how you teach.
yes,
That's how you comply with the scientific method via 921.
correct,
And if you don't do those things, then you haven't complied with the scientific method via 921. Fair?
correct,
And then you have an unreliable methodology. Fair?
correct,
Now, you tell me, sir, in your report, and not just the cause, but anywhere in your report, where it identified an ignition source.
it didn't,
Where in your report, sir, did it identify the first fuel ignited?
it doesn't, it doesn't,
Where in your report, sir, did it identify the circumstances that brought the two together?
it doesn't,
Where, and you tell me, and you can tell the court, where in 921 does it say time of day is data that helps you find the ignition source?
it doesn't,
Where does time of day help you find the first fuel ignited?
it doesn't,
Where does time of day help you find the circumstances that brought them together?
it doesn't,
Does it say that? Not in 921, but any document you can show me that you folks rely on.
time of day is part of all data,
Okay.
and it says all data,
Data that you determine the cause, data that points to the ignition source, data that points to the first fuel. Where in any peer-reviewed source can you tell me, sir, where time of day helps you find the ignition source and first fuel? Are you looking at your cheat sheet?
I am looking at notes I took.
Is that on a cheat sheet we made copies of? Sir?
Sir, what are you referring to?
I am referring to note prep that I took for sections out of 921, since I can't remember the entire
So-
book.
Okay.
So is that different than we had? Because I saw the 1033 notes.
Correct.
Your Honor, can we take a 2-minute break and get a copy? I don't even know what he's looking at.
Yeah, we'll make copies for everybody.
1, 2, maybe 1 for my expert so I can talk to him. 3 for us, 1 for the prosecutor.
These are notes relating to the.
To 921,
The 921.
Okay.
which were different than the 1033s.
Pardon? We're still on the record.
Oh,
Oh,
I
we'll
thought
we'll
we
go,
were
we'll go off the, we'll go off to make the copies. Thank you, sir. Can we figure out how many we need? Okay. Okay, we're back on the record. Does everyone have a copy? You trying to get his attention?
We'll be fine.
You good? Do you want to go give it to him? Were you going to give him something?
Whenever you're ready, Your Honor.
Okay, one moment. I'm ready.
Thank you. Your Honor, Mr. Leroy, can we agree that NFPA 921 speaks directly to the kind of data to collect to identify cause?
Yes?
And that's reflected in section 9.3, is it not?
Where are we now?
19, oh, I'm sorry, 19, not 9.3, 19.3, Your Honor.
Okay.
And chapter 19, I believe, is
Exhibit O.
O.
Okay.
It's on the screen, Your Honor, if you want.
Oh,
Data collection processes for fire cause determination include identification of fuel packages, ignition sources, oxidizers, and circumstances associated with how the fuel and ignition source came together. Did I read that right?
Yes.
Data should be collected to identify all potential fuels, ignition sources, and oxidants within the area or areas of origin. Did I read that right?
Yes.
Right. Tell me where time of day, you already told me it's not in 921, it's certainly not in that, right?
You'll find it under chapter 23. It's not under there, no.
All right. Well, chapter 23 talks about incendiary fires, and that's after you've determined a cause from your analysis, correct?
Correct.
All right, so let's talk about focus on cause. You in your report never identified an ignition source or first fuel, right?
Not in my report.
You in your testimony or preliminary exam never identified an ignition source or first fuel, correct?
Correct.
You in your trial testimony when Linda Sturmer was on trial for murder never identified an ignition source or first fuel, correct?
Correct.
Or the circumstances.
Not in those words, no.
You, in your evidentiary hearing in October 2018, never identified an ignition source or first fuel, correct?
Correct.
Or how they came together, correct?
It was never identified.
Okay. So in 3 times where you were under oath in connection with Linda Sturmer's criminal case and your report, you have never identified the causal factors that are specified in Chapter 9, correct?
That is correct.
That you've learned throughout your entire career that you have to identify to have a cause, correct?
Correct.
That you have taught other people in your teachings that you have to identify to have a cause, correct?
Yes.
You agree with me that if you don't determine those factors, that you haven't complied with 921.
Correct.
And you haven't complied with 921 in the scientific method, which is specified in Chapter 19.
I have.
If you don't identify those, you have not complied with the scientific methods as laid out in Chapter 19 for cause.
I did identify them. They're not in my report.
I'm sorry?
They did not make it in the report in 2007.
And it did not make it into the testimony in all those 3 times that we talked about.
Okay?
Am I right?
Yes.
Today is the first time you have an ignition source?
No.
Is this the first time you're telling Linda Sturmer's defense team about the ignition source?
Ignition source was discussed.
Ignition source in the area of origin in the 2 feet of rubble. You know that James Shinsky on January 15 did some excavation?
Yes.
You hadn't done excavation before then.
Yes, I did.
What excavation did you do? What tools did you use?
Myself and Sergeant Stormzan,
Who?
Sergeant Greg Stormzan.
How do I spell that?
It's right in my report. It's Stormzand.
Was he tasked with the duty of writing down what was excavated?
No,
So he doesn't have a report either.
he does not.
So there is no report that exists of the excavation, sir.
We excavated. You're not going to find a detailed written report about the excavation.
And you excavated, and tell me how the excavation came about. What did you do?
We went in there with shovels, removed the debris in the basement, which is also included the debris from the basement and the living room from directly above. Examined the debris. We reconstructed the scene as best we could. Of course, we couldn't do the living room because the living room floor didn't exist at that point, but we found remnants of chairs on the concrete floor of the basement.
Chairs that would have been in the basement or the first floor?
We do not know.
You never took a single picture of it, did you?
I did not.
Then why, if you did all that, how long did it take? It takes a lot of work,
It did.
right? That's the dirty, strenuous work that they talk about, right? Then why did you testify that you didn't do any excavation because you didn't see evidentiary value in it?
Your Honor, again, I'm going to object. That's not what the testimony says.
Okay.
The testimony says, did you collect any samples? And his answer was, I didn't see any evidentiary value in it. Not excavation. This is misconstruing the testimony.
She can read, Your Honor, sorry. You can
I'll
read the
sustain
testimony.
the objection to the extent if it does not mimic the question asked.
You didn't collect any debris because you didn't see evidentiary value in it. That's what you testified, right?
Yes,
And did you look at all the electrical wiring that would have been on the first floor?
no,
You don't profess to have like expertise in the electrical systems of a house or a building or something, right?
I do not.
Right. You would rely on others from the MSP.
I would
Or-
rely on others from an outside firm.
Well, do you recall testifying, sir, in the evidentiary hearing that you don't use outside contractors?
I don't know the context of the question.
Well, in this case, you didn't use an outside contractor. You didn't hire anybody, right?
We did not. We relied on the insurance company, electrical engineer.
And that reliance on the insurance company, that didn't come about until after the 15th, right?
Yes,
And you did your report right after the 12th when you learned of the positive gas.
correct.
But ultimately, you say you relied on that, and that's an important part of ruling out any electrical cause for the fire. Fair?
It can be.
Well, it was in this case, right?
It can, the electrical cause was ruled out because of the description and the type of fire it was.
The electrical cause, you can't do any unless you do some critical data analysis and collection about the electrical, correct?
In regards to this case, the critical examination of the electrical wasn't as necessarily to be really critical because of all of the factors in this case.
So, in other words, you didn't do any data collection about the electrical yourself or any of the MSP folks?
I examined the electrical in the area that I could, in the area of the living room.
The 18 by 18, the 2 feet of debris that was in the basement?
Correct.
You examined, what electrical did you examine?
I do not recall finding any.
And you didn't take any notes?
Correct.
So, you did or did not rely on the electrical report by the electrician?
I did also.
Well, that's important, right? You want to make sure a pro has looked at it and ruled out electrical.
Correct.
Because if the pro doesn't look at it and rule out electrical, then you can't necessarily rule out electrical, right? Because he knows more than you.
Not necessarily.
Oh, you know more than him?
No. But you phrased it that you can't eliminate electrical without having an electrical engineer looking at it, and that's not true.
You can't eliminate electrical because you don't have the expertise, you say, to
I did
rule
not
out
say
electrical
that.
wiring and in
No,
the basement.
I can eliminate electrical.
Because of what? Your technical background?
Because of my electrical training, I'm not an electrical engineer, and I'm not an expert in electrical engineering, though I have been taught to look at electrical in fire scenes.
So you know the fundamentals anyways.
I know how to look at electricity as it pertains to fire scenes.
What's Ohm's law?
Ohm's law that's the law between the watts and the amps that are being used. And
That's good you can give us?
no, yeah,
Yes?
I didn't hear your question.
That's as good as you can give us, sir?
Yes.
An argumentative,
Your Honor, this is a Dalbert here. He's
starting to
not
argue
trying.
with witness, Your Honor.
I'll allow it. but-
Thank you. Yes?
Yes,
And you didn't examine anything in the basement because you said it was vaporized. Remember that?
that was a question asking about the living room.
Well, if we look at your testimony from your trial at page 197 and 198,
What exhibit are you on?
that was trial testimony of exhibit, I believe it's D, Your Honor.
Thank you.
page, here we go, bottom 197. I could not, I've already said I determined the area of origin was the first floor living room. I couldn't take samples from the floor because the floor doesn't exist anymore. It's totally burned up. It's vaporized. Are you telling this court that you did this significant layering and excavation and determined that there was not any part of the living room floor?
Not that I could identify.
Well, so you don't know if it was vaporized or not when you testified under oath. Fair?
I could not identify any
So when you said it was vaporized, you don't know one way or another if it was vaporized. Fair?
I could not find it. I'm not going to, if I use the words vaporized incorrectly.
To this day, sir, you haven't identified an ignition source from your excavation of the basement, have you?
From the excavation of the basement, I gleaned no information from the excavation of the basement.
You've not identified an ignition source, have you?
The ignition source is identified as an open flame source.
14 years later, that's what you have?
Yes.
Open flame? And the first fuel ignited?
Would have been the gasoline
The gasoline where?
in the living room.
All right. We'll talk about that gasoline in the living room. You understand you have to weigh all the evidence that you have?
Yes.
All right. Let's talk about your important conclusion at your report, which was that the gas on his sweatpants, Todd Sturmer's sweatpants, indicate an arson fire. Remember that?
Yes.
That would therefore assume that Mr. Sturmer didn't have gas on his pants before the fire, correct?
Well, at some point, we know he didn't have gasoline on his pants. That's assumed.
I'm not trying to quibble with you. I'm not trying to be coy with you. Your hypothesis was that Mr. Sturmer had gas on his pants or got gas on his pants at the ignition of the fire.
Correct.
Which then necessarily means that you have to rule out other hypotheses, correct?
Correct.
So Mr. Sturmer is in the house and you later found there was gas on his pants, correct?
Correct.
So before the fire, you have to rule out that he didn't have gas on his pants from earlier that morning for working on the house, that he had done stuff around the yard that morning, the day before, he's wearing yesterday's sweats, right?
Correct.
What did you do, sir, in your analysis to rule out that hypothesis?
The interviews that were conducted by the investigators showed that none of the witnesses identified the smell of gasoline or gasoline on Todd Sturmer.
Okay. Well, let's first go to your trial testimony, sir. And I want to exhibit D, Your Honor. It's page 210 and 211. Let me know when you're ready, sir.
Go ahead.
At the bottom of 210. You don't know where the sweatpants were at the time something got out of them. And your answer that's correct. You don't know how something got on the sweatpants that caused the odor. That's correct. And you kind of repeated probably. You don't know how something got on the pants that caused the odor. That's correct. Was that your testimony under oath?
Yes.
Was that when you were under penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Did you tell the truth, sir?
Yes.
When you were asked those questions, gave those answers?
Yes.
You didn't know how the pants, something got on the pants. You don't know where the pants were when they got something on them, fair?
Correct.
So you don't know when the gas got on the pants, correct?
It can be inferred. No, I don't.
Okay. And you're an ethical person and you swore to be a truth seeker and not a case maker, right?
Yes.
You understand that you have to consider these alternate hypotheses, correct?
Correct.
Because if you don't consider these alternate hypotheses, that's a serious error, isn't it?
Correct.
In fact, 19.7 of NFPA, and that is, what would I keep that? And that is Exhibit O. Says it's a serious error, doesn't it?
Where are you referring again?
Exhibit O, Chapter 19, and that's 19.7, and let me call that out.
Okay.
You there?
Yes.
Once the hypotheses regarding the cause of the fire have been attested, the investigator should review the entire process to ensure that all credible data are accounted for and all credible alternate cause hypotheses have been considered and eliminated. Did I read that right?
Yes.
When using the scientific method, the failure to consider alternate hypotheses is a serious error. Read that right?
Yes.
You agree with that?
Yes.
If you don't consider alternate hypotheses, how can you know that your hypothesis is right or wrong?
Correct.
Critical question to be answered by the fire investigator are there any other cause hypotheses that are consistent with the data, right?
Correct.
And then the investigator should document the facts that support the cause determination to the exclusion of all other reasonable causes. Is that right?
Yes.
That's what you agree with.
Yes.
That's what you need to do.
Correct.
If you don't do that, you're not complying with scientific method, right?
Correct.
Which results in an unreliable methodology, right?
Yes. Yes.
So we have before, and right now you can't rule out that he got gas on him before. Is that what you just told me?
Again, using the data of the witness statements. He did not have gas on before.
All right. The witness statements were that you relied on, who's that, Matheny and Calhoun, because they didn't smell gas?
Matheny, Calhoun, and also statements from the boys who had left earlier in the day.
There's also hypothesis that he could have gotten gas on him once he was outside and before you got there and smelled gas, correct?
Correct.
You knew from the testimony that Matheny and Calhoun got there and Linda Sturmer was lying on top crying and all that, right?
Yes.
You also knew that he was in one spot pretty close to the house, right?
Yes.
They had to move him to another spot.
Correct.
To get him away from that big fuel can side of the house?
I thought it was to get away from the house fire.
Okay, the house is on fire, right?
Yes.
So they moved him and they used a boat. Remember that?
Yes.
It's in your report.
Yes.
All right. So the first thing we need to do, and by the way, that movement took place after Matheny and Calhoun put clothes on him, correct?
I do not know.
Well, that's an important thing to know, right? You'd want to know that important data to know if your hypothesis is correct.
I do.
So we got two different afters. We have one possibility that Matheny's clothes could have caused a positive gas test, right?
That is one.
You need to be able to rule that out.
Correct.
The other possibility is, if that wasn't the case, maybe there was some gas in the floor of the boat near where they would have put a seat, and that has to be ruled out, right?
We're kind of off on the really far ends of ruling out gasoline in a toy plastic boat.
You didn't know it was a dinghy type boat? It was described as a kayak too, so it was a dinghy?
Don't know exactly the description.
You have a photograph of the boat. I didn't see
No.
it. So you don't know what the boat exactly looks like.
No.
Right? In any event, it's just like a chain of custody of evidence, isn't it? You understand that if we go from point A to point B to point C to point D with some evidence, you need to have a good chain of custody, right?
With evidence? Yes.
So you don't get contamination of the evidence, correct?
Correct.
So you need to make sure that the evidence didn't get contaminated somewhere between A and B,
Correct?
and B and C,
Yes.
and C and D.
Yes.
Kind of like this, right? You want to make sure that there wasn't gas that was transferred to those sweatpants from the clothes, or, if not there, from the boat. You still have to consider these.
Okay? Yes.
Am I right? That's what the scientific method requires, right?
Yes.
We've talked about it all day, right?
Yes.
You have to consider alternate hypotheses, right?
Correct.
And you also, as an ethical person, are open to new evidence, correct?
Correct.
All right. And what you said was, you kind of ruled out the Matheny thing because nobody smelled gas before you got there. Nobody smelled gas on Matheny, or strike that. You ruled out Matheny clothes getting positive on it. Why?
The clothes that were sent to the lab came back negative, except that we found out later one shirt, which we didn't know was the Matheny's, came back positive.
Okay, at the time, I want to make this clear, and I'm not insinuating you're a fraud or something. You need to consider new evidence. At the time you were doing this, you didn't know it was Matheny's shirt that was mislabeled Todd Sturmer's shirt.
Correct.
You thought it was all Todd Sturmer stuff.
Yes.
So now we have to figure out, okay, did Matheny's clothes transfer gas to the sweats?
Correct.
That's a reasonable consideration you have to be able to rule out, right?
Yes.
And by the way, you are familiar with, in your career, these lab tests and how they go about it, gas chromatograph, mass
Yes.
spectrometry,
Yes.
that's a qualitative test.
Correct.
It'll tell you whether you got 2 drops of gas or a gallon of gas.
Correct.
And it also tells you that it's sensitive to 0.005%. You know that?
I do not know the percentage its accuracy to.
You do know that it's very sensitive.
Yes.
And would you have any reason to disagree if I told you it's 0.005%?
I don't have any, since I don't know, I can't disagree with you.
Right. And you can do some math though, right? We've seen you do that, right? 0.005%, that equals basically what? 1 out of 20,000, correct?
Yes.
That's how sensitive it is, right?
Again, I don't know the sensitivity of the gas chromatograph.
What I want to do is direct you maybe some evidence that you didn't know and perhaps you should consider when you're looking at your hypothesis. The first one is Exhibit Z, which would be the affidavit of Mike Matheny. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay. I want to direct you to paragraph 3. When I got to Todd Sturmer, there was no odor of gasoline or any other petroleum product emanating from his clothes or body or clothes. If there had been, I would have noticed it. See that?
Yes.
That's new evidence you didn't know, right?
I've not, since this is only a couple months old, I've not seen this.
This is new, I just asked you, this is
Yes.
new evidence you hadn't considered, right?
Correct.
Being an ethical, honest person, you need to consider this new evidence.
Correct.
4, when Connie and I got to Todd, he was badly burned. He was practically naked. The only clothing on him was down around his ankles. Did I read that right?
Yes.
So when we talked about when you got there was clothes on him, right?
Correct.
But that was Mike Matheny's clothes.
I don't know whose clothes it was
All right.
at that time.
But you do know Mike Matheny's clothes, the shirt tested positive.
The plaid shirt
Right.
tested positive.
Number 6, some of the clothes from the truck included a red flannel type shirt of mine that was similar to the one labeled on a silver can, evidence tag 0011, right? Yes?
Yes.
And a picture is attached, and we can go to the second page, the third page. The clothes I kept in the truck were mixed with tools and other items that had gasoline in them. It is not unusual that I and my clothes would come in contact with fuel or other petroleum products in the course of my business. Isn't that correct? Is that what you
Yes.
read or testified to under oath? You know what an affidavit is, right?
I do.
Okay. So we go to the second page. This is at 11. This is the one we're talking about, right? Go to the third page, number 0011.
Yes.
Mislabeled, it's mislabeled, Tops Turner shirt. But you relied on that because you didn't know it was mislabeled, right?
Yes.
Fair. Now that's new evidence that it was mislabeled, right?
Yes.
Now, given this new evidence that there was no smell of gas when the first two people got to Todd Sturmer, with Linda Sturmer lying on it, and there's gas on Mr. Matheny's shirt, you can't rule out with rigorous testing that Matheny's shirt didn't transfer the gas, correct?
I'm confident saying Mr. Matheny's shirt did not transfer the gas.
All right. The evidence in this case you have to consider is one, Linda Sturmer, who was lying on top of him, her clothes didn't test for gas, correct?
That is correct.
The canine, the MSP dog, didn't hit on any gas, did he?
Yes, he did not.
The evidence is there was no smell of gas before Matheny and Calhoun put the clothes on him. That's all evidence that suggests he didn't have gas at the time.
That suggests that the people at that time did not notice it.
Well, you read Mr. Matheny's
I did.
affidavit. Had there been gas, I would have noticed it, or petroleum product, right?
In his opinion, yes.
Well, his opinion is evidence.
Yes,
You have to consider his evidence,
and I do.
all right? Are you calling him a liar?
Of course not.
All right. And that's evidence you need to, as an ethical investigator, subject to the rigorous testing requirements of the scientific method, you have to consider that.
I do.
And having considered that, you can't rule out that Matheny's clothes didn't cause the positive test.
I can.
Tell me what you're relying on. Tell our court what you're relying on for that.
Mr. Mueller, I'll take a lunch break sometime in the next 10 minutes, so if you have a good spot in your examination that you want to stop anytime in the next few minutes.
I'll tell you what, I think it's good enough that we stop here.
Okay. Okay, council, we'll take a 1-hour lunch break and resume at 1:30. Thank you.